Hello everyone. Over the past 3 years now, I started making videos about Final Fantasy specifically because of Final Fantasy IX, and the amount of references that it had towards the previous games of the series. And as of today, I realized I made similar videos covering all of the single-player mainline games that came after 9. So here's a compilation of all of them in one single place, where we can revisit some of them, as it's one of my favorite topics. Thanks for watching and all the support through the years. Enjoy, and I'll be seeing you with more stuff in the future.
Madeleine statue in Alexandria. By the way, we are going to be mostly in chronological order from the introduction up until the very end of Disc 4. So, when we start the game, we control Vivi in Alexandria. If you go back one screen and interact with the statue there, you'll see a message commemorating a general called Madeleine. This name might be taken from Final Fantasy VI main protagonist Terra's, or Tina, mother. Now, if you are confused because Terra's mother name is Madonna, which I find it very funny, that's because that's one of the many quirky translations that exist in that game, while in Japanese she is called Madeline. Cornelia in I Want to Be Your Canary. Final Fantasy IX starts with the theater troupe Tantalus, presenting their play in Alexandria, with the secret mission of stealing their Princess Garnet during it. The play is called I Want to Be Your Canary, which is in its way a big Shakespeare reference, and one of its characters is Princess Cornelia. Cornelia is the very first city you visit in the original Final Fantasy, as you spawn next to it at the start of the game, just like how Alexandria is the first city here. In a similar fashion, in the Japanese version, Paku mentioned that the other character, Prince Schneider, is from the Sassoon country, which is its location in Final Fantasy III. Gilgamesh appearance. I know I said that I won't be mentioning references that are in numerous entries, but this one is special. When you think of Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy, you think of the same swordsman that travels through dimensions and lands in most games collecting swords, very iconic swords. But in Final Fantasy IX, the character named Gilgamesh is not revealed until later, and is introduced to you as Alleyway Jack, a 4-armed treasure hunter that appears in Alexandria, Treno and Daguerreo, mostly stealing you but also teaching you how to play cards. And will reveal his true name if you get a higher ranking later in the game. Gilgamesh was introduced first in Final Fantasy V as a recurring antagonist that ended up befriending you, an optional GF in Final Fantasy VIII and in later entries. You can also find a letter from Enkidu mentioning Excalibur, both a character and a weapon respectively, from Final Fantasy V. Rufus' welcoming ceremony in the Evil Forest. By that, I mean the title of the song played by the orchestra that you can listen to during an active time event, as there's also musical references in this game. As a Final Fantasy VII fan, I was very happy when I first heard this. This song is indeed from that game, and as you can predict from its name, it plays when Junon receives the new Shinra president, Rufus Shinra, in their city, while you dress up as a grunt and join the parade. Ketshi Fortune in Dali. When resting at the inn at the village of Dali, you can interact with an item that will give you a good omen and fortune. Now, that's something very common to have, but the way the last text shows your lucky color for today is white is reminiscent of when you first meet Ketshi in Final Fantasy VII, and while giving you your fortune, it reads, your lucky color is blue, even if you never ask for that type of fortune to begin with. Locke in Lindblom. During your first visit to Lindblom, you can talk to an old man whose name is Locke, likely a reference to one of Final Fantasy VI party member Locke Cole, arguably the sexiest man in the franchise, if I have to be objective. Cloud reference in Lindblom's weapon shop. Speaking of sexy, if you visit the weapon shop and interact with a bunch of swords that are on the wall, Zidane would say, I remember a guy with spiky hair who carried something like this, in allusion to Cloud Strife, who besides carrying some big swords, he's also called Spiky Hair in-game. Fabul. This name appears on different occasions, mainly because it's the last name of Lindblom's regent, Cid Fabul. The name Fabul alludes to the homonym city or castle in Final Fantasy IV, home of the powerful monks, including your party member Yang, and protectors of the Wind Crystal. Palom and Porom. One of the shops in Lindblom mentions Polom's action figures. Palom and Porom are the twin mages that help Cecil to become a paladin in Final Fantasy IV, so this is a combination of their names. making it even harder for me to remember them accurately and don't confuse each other. The Trance ability. This one is about a mechanic in the gameplay or battle system. Similar to limit breaks in Final Fantasy VII, there's a bar under your ATB that will charge when you get hurt. Once it's filled, you get automatically in trance mode, where every character has its own power-ups and different looks with a pinkish aura. This ability is not just similar looking to Final Fantasy VI Terra's Morph ability, in which she turns into her Esper form, but rather it is said ability, as Morph in the Japanese version is called in fact Trance. Bells as keys in Burmecia, and Minu mention. When you enter Gizamaluk Grotto, to make it on time to Burmecia that is being attacked, a fallen soldier will give you a bell that will serve you as the key to open the doors. This is a similar concept to the way you enter Karshan Keep in Final Fantasy II. If that sounds too generic of a concept, one of these specific bells in its description will be signed by Philosopher Minu, referencing Minu from Final Fantasy II, the powerful white mage who aids you in the game from the very start and will help you get Ultima. Altair and Vega in Southgate. If you talk to one of my favorite NPC's name ever, Jobless Chef in Southgate, he'll mention that he has a shop called Altair that you can visit later. Altair by itself is the name of the home base of the Resistance in Final Fantasy II, your starting point, but there's more than that, as Altair is the name of a star and one half of the Japanese festival called Tanabata, the Star Festival. The other one is called Vega. These two represent two lovers who were placed in the sky as stars, yet they can be together as the Celestial River or the Milky Way separated them, only meeting once a year on the 7th day of the 7th month of the year. I'm sure you've seen these names or concepts being represented in many Japanese games. For example, to get an idea of this starry sky, when Cloud and Tifa made a promise under the stars, you can see in the sky this Milky Way in a very nice detail when the camera tilts up. And Altair and Vega are two stars that are on opposite sides. I find it very funny that Final Fantasy IX made this romantic tale about two item shops of all things, separated by the mountains. Burmecia and Zozo similarities. Towns in Final Fantasy and most RPG games tend to be your resting stops, the place where you can rest and prepare for what's ahead. In Burmecia case, as the town is attacked, you see it in ruins and with the probability to engage in random battles as any other dungeon, and some fixed story battles. It's also known as the city where the rain doesn't stop. These things are shared characteristics with the town Zozo in Final Fantasy VI, as when you enter, it be constantly raining, populated by thieves mainly, which would make it be filled with random encounters, instead of your average, nice, relaxing shelters. Alexandria and Varon similarities. In this case, it's more complex than just similar layouts or shared features. It's more about the whole structure that these kingdoms and the rulers have, and it's a pretty interesting one. At this point of the game, we are approaching the end of Disc 1, and for that we have our first real meeting with General Beatrix of Alexandria and the mysterious Kuja, who approaches Queen Bran of Alexandria, and are currently invading Burmecia with their Black Mage army. And there's a lot of parallels that we can make of these characters and its kingdom structure with Final Fantasy IV. In Final Fantasy IV, you start as Captain Cecil of Baron, after invading the city of Mysidia to get one of the crystals. You can make the comparison between Queen Bran and the King of Baron. He was once a benevolent ruler who took the children Cecil and Cain and raised them as his own, but there's a sudden change in his decisions, when he starts commanding this invasion to retrieve the crystals. Just like how Queen Bran is also a loved ruler who adopted the child as hers and is now Princess Garnet, also known as Dagger. But this first section of the game, you start seeing questionable decisions, like invading Burmecia here. Both kingdoms have on their lines two of the most powerful generals leading their army, a very similar army also. These are the paladins Beatrix of Alexandria and Cecil Harvey from Baron, initially a Dark Knight. Not only that, but these two characters start realizing the sudden change in the rulers and eventually go against them in their own way. And finally, you see that the reason for their sudden change is because there is a second mastermind behind them, either controlling or convincing the king and queen for their own benefit. These characters are the game's main antagonists, Kuja and Golbez. So as you can see, there's a similar relationship in both games and kingdoms. Trueno and Gidor. Back-to-back-to-back cities parallels. This one is again about some shared features. Treno is considered a city of nobles. You can find a lot of eccentric things here, like a card game stadium, an item shop with monsters to challenge, and more important, an auction house to get random items. But not only that, this city has a distinguished difference between the upper sector and the slums, home of some thugs and making clear the difference between the rich and the poor. The city of Jidor in Final Fantasy VI shares some of these characteristics, as it has its own action house, and the nobles around mention how you should take care about anyone from Soso, the city below, that will come up and mug you. Une and Doga through the game. Speaking of auction houses, two of the items that you can get in here are called Une's Mirror and Doga's Artifact. These names belong to the Final Fantasy III support characters Une and Doga, powerful magicians who aid you in the game. This is not the only place you'll see these names, as you can find some inscriptions signed by Une the Mole in Mount Gulg. Or even more interesting, if you take these two artifacts to the Black Mage village during Disc 4, you'll trigger a cutscene, where the music theme will start playing. The Ant Lion boss fight. The Ant Lion is a monster creature that doesn't feature only in one game. You may have seen this enemy in another game like Final Fantasy V or XII, but the reference here is specific to Final Fantasy IV Ant Lion. That's because both creatures are initially considered tame and that they don't attack people, despite its looks, according to Edward. But they go on a rampage still, emerging from the sand, attacking a prince, Edward and Prince Pack, before the boss fight starts. Clim Hazard. In your fight against Beatrix, at the end she'll deal a powerful blow that will leave your party members to 1 HP, ending the fight in a loss. This attack is called Clim Hazard, and it's a reference to one of Cloud Strife's limit breaks of the same name. You can even get this attack later on. There's also one of Zidane's ability called Lucky 7, that is from Final Fantasy VII, but you know, the idea of 7 being lucky in slots is something very common. Joseph's story. This one is really cool, and more on your nose than you'd expect. When meeting Ramuh at the Pinnacle Rocks, he'll ask you to get 5 parts of his tale, and put it in order, choosing the appropriate ending out of 2 options. The rest of the story goes like this. Once upon a time, 33 small countries fought together against an empire. One day, a rebel troop visited a man named Joseph, who lived with his daughter. Owing a debt to the troop, he gladly accepted their plea for help. They headed for a cavern in the snowfields. With Joseph's help, the troop defeated the Adamantoids in the snowfields cavern and acquired the goddess bell that they needed to enter the Empire's castle. Hey, we talked about that bell earlier. On their way home, they fell into a trap set by a traitor. Joseph gave his life to save the troop. The troop left without telling Joseph's daughter Nelly about the tragedy. And the 2 possible endings talk about the explanations of them not talking to Nelly about it and such. This is exactly what happens in Final Fantasy II, when the monk Joseph, with an F, joins you, and at the end of the dungeon you get intercepted by the pirate traitor Borgen, and in his death he activates his trap card, with Joseph sacrificing himself to save the crew from the falling rock. A very common thing to most temporal party members there, by the way. Even his daughter's name is Nelly. It's such a direct reference and I loved it. Eidolons and Magicite. Summons are pretty common in Final Fantasy and one of the most iconic things. They can go by many names, such as Aeons, Espers, Primals, or in this case Eidolons. And the way to get these summons in action is very similar to Final Fantasy VI, through beautiful stones that you equip and grant you the ability to summon them. While in Final Fantasy VI, that's how you are able to use them and learn abilities, equipping what is called Magicite and release the potential of the Espers. Also, both times it's Ramu the one who introduces you this for the first time. I guess the wise old man is the best choice for this type of things. Lally Ho. Arriving to Competi, you'll be received by a new race, the Dwarves. This is one of the most famous and iconic races in any fantasy-like type of media, and in this game, although different looking, they will introduce to you with their greeting Rally Ho, even not letting you in until you respond the same way. This one is the same as the dwarves you meet in Final Fantasy IV and III, Lally Ho. Although a little bit different in aesthetics and location, still keeping the traditional greeting. Mog's importance and Maduin. There's a lot of Muggles in Final Fantasy IX. They serve you as a save point, shop, and mail delivery. But there's one that stands out the most. It's the one closest to the little girl you met from the summoner's village, Eiko. And its name is Mog, the same as the most important Muggle in Final Fantasy VI, that you can even have as a party member and make it a dragoon if you want to. But there's even more than just that. Later in the game, Mog intercepts when Kuja wants to remove Eiko's Eidolons from her, giving itself as a new summon to fight, and asks you to use the attack Terra Homing. During that animation we can see how the Eidolon look, and it's probably not what you expect out of a Moogle. When we check the ribbon that allows you to use the summon, you see that the name is Madin. Terra's father in Final Fantasy VI is indeed Maduin, although written differently in English, they share the same name. A similar situation with Terra's mother's name, funny enough. Eiko and Rydia. Speaking of Eiko, you can make some connection between her and Rydia from Final Fantasy IV, as they share some attributes. They are both very young girls when they can join the party. They are from a villager of summoners, whose life revolves around it, that was destroyed by the main antagonist in some way or another, making them the sole known survivor, and can perform white magic and summon, of course. At this point in the game, we are reaching the end of Disc 2. The crystals that Queen Bran were looking for while invading several towns are finally collected, and her lust for power grew even further. When the Black Mage army defect and leave with Kuja, she sets out to hunt him down, with the power of the most powerful Eidolon at her disposal now. The Queen and her army met Kuja at the coast of the Ifa tree, and she uses the newly acquired Garnet Crystal to summon the King Dragon Bahamut, a staple of the series. Kuja handles the situation without any worries, as he reveals his secret weapon. A mysterious big red eye appears in the sky, and instead of destroying Alexandria's army, it had the power to enslave Bahamut itself, and uses it to annihilate Queen Bran and her troops, with a big mega flare, a very scary sight. After that, we can see that the party runs to Bran's last breathing moments, as she dies regretful of the path she took on, motivated by greed and that lust of power, after her husband died. I have to admit, if someone wants to make the death of a total evil character emotional, I think this is a perfect example. With Garnet or Dagger having her last farewell to her adopted mother, she goes back to Alexandria, where, escorted by General Beatrix and Steiner, becomes the new queen. The Invincible Ship. The first day as Queen of Alexandria is a rough one for Dagger, as Kuja invades the city with his newly acquired Bahamut. Dagger, thanks to Eiko, is able to summon the Eidolon protector of the city, Alexander, and defend the city, but once again Kuja summons that ominous red eye in the sky, revealing to be an airship called the Invincible. This name is shared with the ultimate ship in Final Fantasy III, the last one you can get. Garland appearance. When calling upon the Invincible, there's another plot revelation that surprised even Kuja for the first time in the game. Inside the ship, you'll see an evil-looking man whose name is Garland, tracing his own plot. The name Garland will surely ring a bell, as he's the very first enemy you face in the original Final Fantasy. Quoting Sakaguchi here, Garland, who was defeated at the beginning of the story, reincarnated as Chaos 2000 years ago, continued his reign of darkness, and then became a warrior of light again, and so on in an infinite loop. He is that Garland, and someone that I'm sure you'll see in the future very soon. The Tantarian enemy. While exploring Alexandria Library, you have the option to fight a specific enemy. It is a book, of course, why wouldn't it be? But the cool things here is the different monsters that you see on it, as they all represent enemies in Final Fantasy V. On the side, you can see a demonic looking monster that is page 32. The blue head that pops out of the book is page 64. The spider on the back is page 128, and the mask on the cover is page 256. If you're wondering why they have those names, it is because they are all part of the same battle where as you knock them down, new pages will appear. The Twin Moons. While exploring Oilbird, you learn the lore of the world, how our Gaia and the planet Terra were once one and had two moons, one blue and one red. This is reminiscent of Final Fantasy IV, whose world has two moons, and one of them is called the Red Moon that you can go to, and where the Lunarian race is from, quite important in the plot. The Warring Triad statues. This is a very cool reference that you find in the Desert Palace owned by Kusha. You'll see that the entrance has three statues, two demonic ones on the sides, and one that resembles an angel in the middle. You can read the inscriptions as Promise of Evil God, Truth of the Devil, and Illusion of the Goddess, respectively. These are a callback to Final Fantasy VI Warring Triad statues, known as the gods and creator of magic that Kefka conquered and allowed him to turn the world into a world of ruin. You can later fight them, and these are called the Demon, known as Poltergeist in the English translation, Goddess, whose name is accurate this time, and Fiend, known as Doom in the English translation, or Evil God if you want to. By the way, I'm in love with that design for boss battles. I jokingly say that my favorite Final Fantasy type of enemy are the complex statues filled with faces, like the Final Fantasy VI last boss, for example, before Kefka or Neo's death. Tetramaster cards. Tetramaster is the card game that serves as the main minigame of this Final Fantasy, one I really enjoy honestly, so you would expect a bunch of Easter eggs here. The cards are mostly monsters of the game, but if you explore Kucha's room in the palace, you can find the card naming way, and to see not only that he sounds similar to the character that allows you to name your character in Final Fantasy IV, but also the card itself has the sprite. Other cards like this are Boko, the known chocobo pet of Final Fantasy V main protagonist, the two moons that mentioned before that we can relate to Final Fantasy IV, and the sprite of an airship, which is the same as the airship you fly in Final Fantasy V. Mount Gulug. Mount Gulug is a place in the Lost Continent that is directly linked to a location in Final Fantasy I. Even if the name there is Mount Gulug, their Japanese name is the same and it's Gurugu Kazan, or Gulug Volcano. As you can see by the world map and the layout, the place is filled with lava and clearly representing a volcano, and even host of the Fire Fiend boss. But more on that later. Hilda. After hearing the name a handful of times, you get to meet Hilda, the wife of Regent Sid and the inspiration of every airship name, the Hilda Guard. Hilda is the name of another princess in Final Fantasy, and she is the princess of Fynn that aids you from the start after the Emperor conquered almost everything there is to conquer in Final Fantasy II. The world map similarities. This one I admit that I've read about it in the past, but I'm not fully convinced. The idea is that now that we have the airship at our disposal, we can travel around the world and see the layout of the map that is supposedly also a reference to Final Fantasy I world. I mean, maybe? It is certainly the most similar, as it doesn't match any of the others, so probably. The first Final Fantasy is likely the most referenced here after all. Pandemonium. We are reaching the latter stages of the game, so here comes the good stuff. Zidane arrives to Garland's domain inside the planet Terra, Pandemonium. And this one here is a really cool one, not just because the name is homonym to Final Fantasy II Final Dungeon, but the theme played here is a slow version of the same track that plays during the Final Fantasy II dungeon, which by the way is my favorite theme of any final dungeon that there is. Kuja and Kefka. After some heavy stuff, the end of Disc 3 included us fighting against Garland first and later Kuja, who got the power of trance, making him more powerful than the latter, so with that in mind, he decides to eliminate him in a cruel way, having no mercy against his former master, kicking him while he's on the floor and launching him into the abyss. This exact sequence can be seen during the moment where Kefka, controlling the power of the mentioned statues, disposed of his Emperor Gestahl in a similar and cruel fashion as every iconic main antagonist should do. Bobby Corwin. After the dramatic moments, we need some wholesomeness, which comes in the form of the independent black mages who refused to follow Kuja and took care of a chocobo egg instead. This chick was born and named Bobby Corwin. And yes, I know it sounds very English, but it's the same in Japanese. Taking the first syllables of each name, you form Boko, probably the most famous chocobo in the series after Bobby, as he is the main protagonist pet in Final Fantasy V and appears from the cover up until the very ending. In the middle he even found a partner and already had kids with her. My boy had a whole arc in that game. Gogo. In the city of Daguerreo, an old man would ask you to get the magical fingertips, mentioning that it belongs to the famous craftsman named Gogo, as he was famous for making dolls, that you can get a couple of them too. Gogo is a very special character. The first appeared as the famed mimic in Final Fantasy V as an enemy in a challenging dungeon, mentioning that he would mimic everything you do, and eventually after the battle you can get the mime job. But also in Final Fantasy VI you'll find him and he will join the party, casting mime constantly. There's an ongoing joke that it's the same Gogo in both games, as he threw himself in a time-space warp in 5, and you can find him in 6 after you get eaten by a Zone Eater and thrown to another place completely. Dagger's real name. No, not Garnet. This one may have become my favorite. I've been mentioning Princess Garnet, who also goes by Dagger, as she uses that as her codename to go undercover at the start of the game, but none of them are really her true name. During the game, you learn that Dagger was born in the summoner village Madain-Sari, the same as Eiko, and later adopted by Queen Bran, so you would expect her to have another name even if that doesn't come up. The thing is, after a very specific side quest exploring Madain-Sari, you'll get access to more inscriptions at the Eidolon Wall, and one of them has a very meaningful message. I have a mortal wound. I won't be able to wait for you very long. I regret being so unemotional for all these years. I'm writing down everything here in the hope that you'll read it someday. To my dearest wife, Jane, although we fought many times, and I might not have shown my affection enough, I love you very much. To my beloved daughter, Sarah, my life changed when you were born. You made me happy. These are the things I want you to know. This very emotional message is written by Dagger's father, or should I say by Sarah's father, but I use Dagger for less confusion. What's mind-blowing is that Sarah is the original Final Fantasy princess. It's that character you must rescue from Garland at the start of the game and of the series. Also yes, you will see her in action in the near future once more. She is the go-to Final Fantasy princess name, if you will. But something even more incredible than that is that Dagger's father message reveals also the name of her mother, which is Jane. Of course, Jane is the name of the Queen of Cornelia, mother of the Princess Sarah of Cornelia. Simple and amazing detail, and even cooler that it's so well hidden. Also, the message is very beautiful, and it's even sadder when you learn that Dagger can't read it, because one of the conditions is to not have her in the party, so you don't get to see her reaction to it. Shinryu. When approaching the final dungeon, Memoria, you'll get a nice welcome by a boss fight, the Nova Dragon, a test worthy of the end of the game, which is heavily influenced by the Final Fantasy V super boss Shinryu. Now, it looks different to what you may remember from Final Fantasy V, and you'll be right, but this is in fact the same dragon, as in both depictions they share the same Japanese name. Furthermore, spin-off games like Dissidia or Record Keeper will include both designs as the enemy known as Shinryu. This is one of the many cases where such a reference became common in the franchise since then, as you can see Shinryu in the remastered versions of Final Fantasy I and IV, and as well in future games like 10 or 14. Kain's Lance. In Memoria, you can find Freya's ultimate weapon. As the Dragoon Knight she is, she got Kain's Lance. Cain is probably one of the most recognizable characters in Final Fantasy, specifically for his design. He's the quintessential dragoon in the series. As much as I enjoy making fun of him, I'm not blind to see that. Also, the picture of the lance is very similar to Cain's main weapon, and you'll get the achievement Cain's Legacy in the remastered version. This too is an instance where the reference appears in more games later, like how Cain's lance is a weapon in Final Fantasy X and XIII. The 4 Fiends of Chaos. There are 4 big bosses in Memoria. All of them are fixed encounters. The first one appears as a woman with the lower body of a snake and 6 arms wielding each a sword. She will introduce herself as "I am one of Chaos Guardians", and indeed she is one of the 4 Fiends of Chaos in Final Fantasy I, the Fire Fiend to be precise, and the final boss of the volcano or Mount Gulu that we mentioned before. The cool thing is that she's not alone, as every Fiend of Chaos is present. Your next encounter is the Fiend of Wind, the 6-headed dragon Tiamat. The third one introduces itself accurately as the Water Chaos Kraken. By his name alone you can imagine how it looks since the original game. And the final Fiend we fight is the Earth Chaos Lich, the undead with the appearance of a skeleton. Now, this is not the first time we encounter most of them, as earlier in the game the party splits to activate each one key, but you only get to fight the Lich, as the rest have to deal off-screen with that, so it's a pleasant surprise to see them all here. And remember, you probably see them again in Stranger of Paradise, so make sure to say hi. Stilba from Final Fantasy VII. One random encounter that you can get during this dungeon is this beautiful red monster called Stilba. His design is very familiar as it shares that and the name of the Final Fantasy VII monster that you encounter at Gaia's Cliff, from who you can learn Magic Breath and Trine. Another monster that gives you Trine is the Materia Keeper, who as you can see is the same enemy but blue. It's the original Stilba, you may say. Death Case. We made it into the final bosses, and Kuja decided to throw at you his new pet first, to test your power. This monster is called Deathcase, and it shares its flying skeletal design and the affinity with death in general with the flying optional monster in Final Fantasy VI, Deathcase. Their name is the same in Japanese. And yes, once more, from this game on, it became a common throwback enemy, appearing in Final Fantasy I and IV, the remastered versions, and in Final Fantasy XIV. The Illusions of Necron and the Last Fight. Defeating Kuja's trance state is not the final boss of Final Fantasy IX, as there's another surprise for you. After all the allusions through the game, one would expect that the last boss who appeared just now will have some link with previous games, and it's a pretty interesting one. The relation between Kuja and Necron shares some interesting parallels with the end boss in Final Fantasy III. This is because after Garland confirmed that Kuja's mortality is close to an end, the fear of his own death and all the despair and hatred after he learned of his mortality, just when his ambitions were within reach, allowed him to awaken the entity known as Necron, to destroy all life and reduce everything into a state of nothingness. This made a very interesting parallel between Kuja and Final Fantasy III main antagonist Xande, originally comrade of Une and Doga, who was given the gift of mortality, which in the end drove him into madness. The imbalance he ended up provoking, motivated by that fear of death, is what allowed the true final boss of Final Fantasy III, the Cloud of Darkness, to appear, an entity who desires to return everything into nothingness, making this connection between the bosses a real cool one. And if we make a quick recap, during the game we can relate Final Fantasy IX main antagonist Kuja to a number of iconic antagonists in the franchise, as we can see the Golbez parallel at the beginning working on the shadows, how he defied his master and killed him mercilessly like Kefka, and in the end how his ambitions and madness create a similar final boss like Xande, making him even a cooler character in my eye personally. There are a few more things about this fight to compare. The start of it is one, which can remind you of how the last battle of Final Fantasy IV happened, with your party knocked down, while the rest that you don't use in the actual fight will call for you and give you that sweet full HP that will surely need. And the last thing is a more straightforward one. as Necron has an attack called Grand Cross, who annoyingly will cast a number of status effects on you, so good luck with that part. This same attack, with the same name, is one that the final boss of Final Fantasy V Neo X-Death will cast to you, because why wouldn't they do that, right? Cloud and Squall. To end things in a lighter tone, and with a less convoluted reference, the epilogue of Final Fantasy IX takes us back to the theater play I Want to Be Your Canary, where Marcus has the iconic line, "No cloud, no squall shall hinder us." He's talking of the weather, of course, but as we all know, this is a reference to the other PlayStation Final Fantasy protagonists, Cloud Strife and Squall Lionheart. The funny part about this is that this is only in the English translation, but given the nature of this game, I think it fits perfectly as it is.
Speaking of Final Fantasy IX, I think it's fitting to start with a callback to this game, and it's a small sneaky one, so we need to pay attention. Upon arriving to the town of Luca on our ship, the liveless city in the game, probably known for its blitzball activities, we have a nice introductory CGI scene, and the music that plays during it is from its soundtrack, The Blitzers. But if we pay attention, we can hear another festive tune in the background during this part of the scene. Now let's hear that part again and compare it with a short song that plays during the first part of Final Fantasy IX, where the Tantalus play "I Want to Be Your Canary" starts as Queen Brand gets excited. To say it properly, the song from the Final Fantasy IX OST Plus, an album that has songs that are mostly used in cutscenes or are short ones that don't loop, called Bran and the Performers, is played in the background for a brief moment during the cutscene arriving to Luca in Final Fantasy X. Staying in Luca, but later in the game if we come back, we can find in this town an NPC that will say one of the most iconic lines in the series, that originated from Final Fantasy IV, or its translations rather. This NPC found at the town square will say that "I asked a warrior monk out to the cafe, but she called me a spoony bard." The line itself is spoken by the character Tela as an insult to Edward, the bard of the game, and contrary to the silly and nonsensical way it sounds, it comes from a moment of hatred or despair from the old man. But eventually got famous for its silliness and used as an example of interesting translations. It has entered popular culture and been referred to outside the Final Fantasy fandom even. Also, while this sounds more like a reference that is used everywhere, technically Final Fantasy X was the first one to make a callback to this line, before the remasters or future games started doing it constantly, like in Dissidia, Final Fantasy XI, XII or XVI. Moving on to a specific category, I want to talk about one of the party members, the Black Mage Lulu, and most specifically her weapon of choice. Contrary to most black mages that use staffs, Lulu will use some sort of voodoo doll or puppet, with her first one being a Moogle doll. The way weapons work in FF10 is very unique, as there are many aesthetically similar ones, but they have their own name according to the special effect they add to the attacks more than anything. And while it's true that her variations will be always based on Final Fantasy mascots, like Cactuars, these get more specific. For example, the first one would be the curious case of Ketchi. I say that because while nowadays you could argue that's another mascot for the series, having appearances in FF6, 11, 13 and 14, this doll in particular seems to be a specific allusion to the Final Fantasy VII character, who's the most famous one as he is a party member, giving his black and white coloration with a red scarf. So I guess it works for both themes, the mascot one and the allusion to other Final Fantasy games one. In fact, he is going to be chosen as a mascot specifically one more time during Final Fantasy X too, where one dress sphere allowed the girls to wear a full outfit of a different creature. Pain will be a Tonberry, Yuna a Moogle, and Riku will be Ketchi, holding a Pupu, a creature from Final Fantasy VIII. Speaking of, that will be another one of Lulu's puppet weapons. Every time you get one of the weapons to be named space related, it is referring to this particular creature and its alien-like features, as shown in its appearance in Final Fantasy VIII.
where it will be a very special type of enemy encounter, appearing many times on its spaceship, abducting various objects on the world map first, until you actually get to fight it after a couple of encounters. You can destroy this UFO while Poo pleads for elixirs like the magic pot do, or you can kill it if you feel chaotic. The reward in the case you have an elixir is a triple triad card, of course. While the other common weapon for Lulu is also going to be Final Fantasy VIII related, with a race that I mentioned every time would fit perfectly as another mascot for the series but didn't have much transcendence, even less than Poo I think. It's the Moomba. Contrary to Poo and its random enemy encounter attribute, Moombas are a full race in Final Fantasy VIII that are tied to the plot or at the very least with very important characters, like Laguna mostly, only being able to say his name out loud, despite being considered like the perfect form of the Shumi race. Also, and more importantly, they are super cute. They could easily cover researchers if given the right timing. Another thing is that this Moomba puppet was used again in the mascot dress sphere in Final Fantasy X-2, but this time is held by Yuna during her Moogle onesie. And finally, for the Lulu section, we have her celestial weapon, the considered ultimate weapon that each character gets. This has to be special, so unlike the rest, it should be unique and not one of the many Moogles or Ketchi you can have, and it will be the Onion Knight. This is certainly not a mascot, it's a clear allusion to Final Fantasy III and the main default job that the characters have in that game, contrary to the more common and simple Knight job. And probably the biggest feature that this game in terms of marketing or brand has, to the point that it's the designated character to represent that game in places like Dissidia or any other spin-off like that. Moving on with the story, later we'll get to know more about the mysterious Seymour and the Aeon he's associated with called Anima. Now, I'll admit this is not much of an illusion, but as the big fan that I am of Tetsuya Nomura's enemy design, I want to show this nightmare fuel of a summon. And by that, I don't mean this already suffering creature. Let's scroll down a little bit and see how worse it gets. And by worse I mean amazing. This is similar to another fantastic enemy design in the series, specifically the final boss of Final Fantasy VIII, the last form of Ultimecia. Mostly for this particular design attribute, where the bottom part of this witch has, surprise, another body that is also active during the special move, so I want to show them. One enemy that I do think is a proper reference, we can find them in the Monster Arena, a place in the Calmlands that, by capturing the enemies of the game, allows you to unlock more challenging fights against unique enemies. One of them, after you capture one of each fiend from every area, is the Nestlug, a hideously mutated snail who's able to hide in its shell at some points during the fight. This one is a reference to the very first boss you encounter in Final Fantasy VI, where you explore the mines of Narsh with Terra, Biggs and Wedge all aboard the Machina armor and fight the snail-like creature Ymir. Ymir? Ymir? Anyways. Of course, outside of being mollusks enemies, one would think that there's no reason to link them directly. But, during the GBA version of FF6, among its additional features, we can find a new boss at the Dragon's Den who's an alternate color version of Ymir, and it's called Nestlug, to make the callback a full circle, as this version came after FF10. This is also the only Monster Arena creation that has its own creature model and does not look like any other recolored fiend that you can fight within the game, so it is quite special. Another classic one you can find here, it's one enemy with a more direct reference in its name, Shinryu, the iconic super boss of Final Fantasy V that eventually turned into a common among the series. But during these days, it was the first attempt to make a callback to it. It's true that in Final Fantasy IX, a second version of the Shinryu appeared, but eventually the long dragon aesthetic remained as the stable design of it, for the remasters or Final Fantasy XIV for example. This creature in FF10, also a type of super boss, while it's a shiny version of the enemy Evrae, has the uniqueness of being a fight underwater, while the original Shinryu in FF5 likes to start the fight with its strong tidal wave, the signature move of Leviathan that it borrows for a second. So this setting underwater may be able to give you some war flashbacks of that fight. And if we talk about Shinryu, we can't leave this one behind. The last big enemy that is a super boss that I want to mention. It's a familiar term nowadays in the series, and it is the Omega Weapon.
The weapons in Final Fantasy are now its own thing, starting properly in FF7 with this biomechanic kaiju vibe, but at this point the Omega weapon only existed in Final Fantasy VIII, making this the first repeating appearance, and therefore a callback to it, as it's the iconic superboss of that game, found at Ultimecia's castle and being the big challenge in the game. And as in the past I did a video about the role of the weapons in the series, let me share what I said about Omega and its alternate version Ultima back then. Omega was originally a monk from Yevon, who was branded as a traitor centuries ago, and executed. So his spirit roamed around the dungeon known as Omega Ruins, where his hatred for Yevon grew so strong that during his death he spawned the creation of Ultima weapon previously mentioned, while his own spirit ultimately became Omega weapon itself, being a stronger version of the other one. There's a pretty nice touch with this weapon in its sequel, Final Fantasy X-2, and that is its description in its bestiary, where you can read: "A mighty fiend of legend, wielding greater magic than ever. This terror teaches all who approach the true meaning of Ultima. Whatever you do, don't call it Atma." A different category that makes Final Fantasy X stand out is the Aeons. While summons in Final Fantasy are almost mandatory, the role, design and use of them in this game made them stand out. We talked about Anima a little bit before, as you can also use it eventually, but one of the secret Aeons to unlock later in the game is a straight up reference to a Final Fantasy IV boss fight. I'm talking about the Magus Sisters. They are a trio of ladies called Sandy, the tall slim one, Cindy, the more chunky one, and Mindy, the smallest one of the bunch. All attributes shared in each game, with the specific detail that the FF10 version they are looking more armored insectoid in their appearance. As an Aeon in this game, they are pretty strong, as there are 3 different characters that are able to break the damage limit, but the orders you give them might be a little bit confusing and random. Still completely worth it though. In FF4, they are minions of the fiend Barbaricia, and they share some similarities in their own boss fight. Things like casting Reflect on Cindy, so Mindy can cast a spell on it and bounce back to the party, and their special attack in both games is the Delta attack. In fact, the animation in 10 is them surrounding the enemy party in 8 crystals, 4 of a blue hue and 4 of a red-orange hue, and I believe that this is intentional to allude to the 4 blue crystals of the surface world and the 4 red-orange crystals of the underworld in Final Fantasy IV. It's quite a special setting in that game after all. Another Aeon you could fit into a reference is Yojimbo himself. While his actions and mechanics are close to the Sansetsuken Deathblow of Odin, it works in its own peculiar way. Yojimbo means bodyguard, so by giving him money you are asking him for his services to kill an enemy. That's the idea. And while the inspiration could be this overall idea, similar looking enemies called Yojimbo already existed in the series, like the ones found in Final Fantasy VI here, so maybe it started there. The next category I arbitrarily decide is the one involving the weapons overall. I said before how in this game they are kinda weird. You obtain them in a less straightforward way, and their distinction come in the special abilities attached to them. For example, Wakka's Fireball is one that has the attribute Fire Strike. If you add any other elemental one, it turns into Double Header immediately. It's mostly the name changes, therefore the focus of the reference is going to be their names here. For Tidus, we already have an interesting one, because with the abilities Double AP and Overdrive, we create Save the Queen. This sword name is commonly associated with Beatrix, the paladin of Final Fantasy IX. Not a playable character fully, but you are allowed to see this weapon. But the particularity is that its Japanese name is Laevatein, because there was a name exchange with a Yuna weapon, who instead got one of her staffs to be called Save the Queen. I honestly can't truly say which one fits better, because while one is a sword and it makes sense, the fact that it's linked mainly to Beatrix might make it a female-oriented weapon to have, as the name was also used for a Kistis weapon in Final Fantasy VIII. While adding to a weapon the ability Double Overdrive alone, will create the sword Lionheart, which is the last name of Final Fantasy VIII main protagonist Squall, and not only that, but it's also the name of his own ultimate weapon, so it's even better. It's also fair to mention that there was a cut buster sword to be included somewhere, and this one came with a traditional model too, so maybe as a celestial weapon proposition. This video from Final Fantasy Union is more adequate to tell that story. For Yuna, besides this case with Save the Queen, a very strong magic based staff will become the Fairy Staff, and it's a reference to Aerith's weapon, the Fairy Rod, which has the same Japanese name as Yuna's, and you can see the connection between the two of them with their white mage abilities. Kimahri has a couple. He may not be exactly a dragoon, but he wields lances, so you know that he will have Cain's lance, with the ability SOS Overdrive. Cain Highwind, of course, is a dragoon of Final Fantasy IV and quintessential dragoon of the series, being referenced in outfit, poses, and with weapons like this, as it happened also in Final Fantasy IX and XIII. While the ability Double AP and Overdrive will create Vina's Gospel, which is the ultimate weapon from Cid Highwind, party member of Final Fantasy VII, and while more of an airship owner like every other Cid, he has Dragoon limit breaks like every other Highwind. Notice the shared last name? Well, without going further, Kimahri has a lance called Highwind too, but at this point that's more generic. And lastly we have Auron and his broadswords. First one will be Matoya's blade, in reference to the Final Fantasy I character, the witch Matoya that lives in a cave with her sentient brooms around, and later is known for appearing in Final Fantasy XIV. While it is weird that a mage is associated with this weapon, that's because it's created with abilities that enhance the magic stat. And a final note on his celestial weapon, the Masamune, which of course is along the Muramasa, a very traditional set of swords that appear in most games, but surely most can think of Sephiroth when reading it. It's also cool that some of these weapons are used in some jobs in Final Fantasy X too. Hey, speaking of. Shifting properly now to this sequel, there are first some small details to highlight, besides the recurring addition of Poo-Poo for example, like the prequel did. So starting from an obvious one, when we are introduced to our Galwin crew aboard the Celsius, a little kid called Shinra appeared.
Shinra's in our bed. He's a real whiz kid.
Shinra, of course, is the name of the company and last name of its presidents, which is one of the big antagonistic forces of Final Fantasy VII. And there is a fun story about Shinra. A cheeky joke about him suggesting that his inventions and discoveries in this game lead to the world of FF7 and all the work Shinra put into energy and the livestream originated from this guy. While the remake in 2020 threw also some very sneaky easter eggs, with some historical photos being suspiciously familiar. Of course, it was confirmed by Nojima that the joke got a little bit out of hand when people started properly theorizing that these words are connected. But for our purposes, it is still a very obvious allusion. Without going any further, in a dungeon of the game called the Fiend Colony, the boss of it is an insectoid enemy called King Vermin. And this might as well be a callback to the way Barret in the original FF7 translation refers to the president when encountering him for the first time, which is at the very least quite amusing choice of words and capitalization, that matches the way this boss fight name is depicted as. Another small details in this game come with the name of a couple of items. The accessories here work as you would expect. Some increase stats, some give you special abilities so you can customize your party, etc. And probably the considered two most powerful accessories that allow your HP to break the limit number of 9999 and to break the damage limit of 9999, and they are called the Enterprise and the Invincible respectively. Both of these are a reference to the main airship names used first in Final Fantasy III, but later used in 4, 9, 14 or 16. Airships in Final Fantasy have been a very important feature in every game, even when they started losing their focus, as you are not able to fly freely in newer games because of the technical limitations. And finally, the last category will be an exclusive feature of Final Fantasy X-2, which is the Garment Grid. These tablets that you are able to assign to any of your party member, and each of them are going to be different, allowing you to set the dress spheres you are able to use during a fight. Each of them will have a different amount of spheres to put, connected in different ways to each other, and different special abilities that you can unlock by changing jobs mid-fight. But what we care about here is the names some of them have. First we have Bum Rush, which is the name of the most powerful blitz attack from Sabin in Final Fantasy VI.
or at the very least, from the first translation of the Super Nintendo game, as it later got updated to Phantom Rush. But we know that Final Fantasy VI has some fun history with these name changes and translations. And on the Final Fantasy VI topic, there's also the one called Treasure Hunt, which of course is a very common phrase at first glance, but seeing that the special abilities it unlocks is Mug, the one associated often with thieves in the series, maybe it can be related to Locke Hall from this game, who often correct people that call him a thief, as he considers himself a treasure hunter instead. After completing the first mission in the game, we are rewarded with the grid Healing Wind. This name refers to a limit break from Aerith Gainsborough in Final Fantasy VII, her first one, which as the name implies, heals everyone in the party. Which is fitting, as the special ability that the grid unlock by using it are spells like Cura and Curaga. Related to FF7, there's also one called Salvation Promised, which makes me think of the concept of the Promised Land, which is a main theme or feature in that game, but I wouldn't be able to say for sure. Like how in a similar way there's the garment grid The End, which is a pretty common phrase of course, but there is one spell in the series that is called like that too, and it's from Selphie's limit break in Final Fantasy VIII, which is pretty funny, and the main reason I wanted to mention it. But one that is truly a reference is the one called Tetra Master, one you can obtain after completing the mission at the Chamber of the Stolen Faith, while rescuing everyone there. At first glance, this sounds like a normal phrasing related to the number 4, but in Final Fantasy IX, the exclusive card minigame shares this name too. A card game that, mind you, I still have no idea how to properly play, and I like it that way. I like when I hope for the best just by vibes, instead of knowing everything properly. That's why I find it fun. And I'd love to finish this video with one that is more of a coincidence than a planned reference. This last name for a garment grid added in a later version is called Last Resort. Last Resort is the name of Hope Estheim limit break move from Final Fantasy XIII, a special move that Lightning also uses at the end of the trilogy to destroy God and call out for Hope's soul in a pretty symbolic way too. Of course, this game didn't exist yet, but the fact that you obtain it from a boss fight related to Shinra that is called Almighty Shinra, similar to how Almighty Vunivelse is that god of light in 13 that uses Hope as his vessel, makes the connection funny to me. And hey, a Final Fantasy XIII reference in a Final Fantasy X Easter egg video? That sounds amazing to me. Final Fantasy XII makes the return of the enemy known as the Demon Wall. As its name implies, it is indeed a wall. Found as a trap at the Dynast King tomb, it shares the same mechanic as its first introduction in Final Fantasy IV, which is getting closer and closer to you, being the last thing most intruders see before it bears down upon them, crushing their bones to dust. This version is more a mechanical monster-like creature, while the ones in Final Fantasy IV and later in Final Fantasy VII are clearly a straight-up wall with a demon coming out of it. The latter version doesn't have this mechanic where it's getting closer to you as a time limit battle, but will attack you in a similar manner, throwing itself at you. Our favorite dragon, Tiamat, made it to this compilation too, as she deserves. The obvious reference is not only in the name, but the bestiary describes her as an anima of the winds, possessed by a violent temperament. And Tiamat, in the original Final Fantasy, was one of the 4 Fiend of Chaos, in particular the Fiend of Wind, atop the Flying Fortress, referencing this wind connection that the dragon has. And as I'm making this video, information of the upcoming Stranger of Paradise is being released, and with that, this super cool looking picture and renders of Tiamat are out, this being of course attached to Final Fantasy I. Which is I find so cool how you have a female human body attached to the multi-dragon heads. Those designs are always my favorite in Final Fantasy. This one is a little bit weird because it's not about the boss in the game, but rather a common enemy, whose name alludes to a very important boss in Final Fantasy V, and that is the boss Twintania. While in Final Fantasy XII this is a snow worm-like dragon, there tends to be categories which many similar looking monsters belong to. In 5, this is the last boss before entering the last floor of the interdimensional rift, and the last remaining monster from the group known as Demons of the Rift, a group of 13 enemies summoned by the main antagonist X-Death in the latest part of the game, So pretty big deal, and thought it was worth mentioning this little callback that can be easily missed. Okay, I may be cheating again, but hear me out. At the end of XIII Cave Palace, there's an undead lord enemy called Ahriman, a very recurring enemy in the franchise. But instead of being a ghost, they look like this. Or this. Or this. Oh, this one's ugly. The 3D doesn't look any prettier. So why is it so different in this game? Well, the key, besides the little yellow color it has around, it's this characteristic single eye in the middle of its body. Ain't that cute? I thought it was worth mentioning how different it is. Rafflesia is a plant or flower-like boss out of control because it is affected by the dense mist of the Feywood forest, an allusion to the similar fight in one of the paintings in Gidor Mansion in Final Fantasy VI. Now when you fight them you realize that the name is not exactly matching, but that's because of the quirky translations of original Final Fantasy VI, as its name in Japanese is the same. But hey, the Pixel remasters are out already, so you better check out how they handle those things. They are totally worth getting it, for many other reasons, but you can also check those things. Arriving at the entrance of Girubegan, it will be guarded by the boss Daedalus, a guardian statue with no head and some sort of one wing in the best modern Sephiroth style. This name, which can also be something like Daedalus, is shared with Final Fantasy VI enemy found at Kefka's Tower, which are two designs completely different. Although, what's interesting about them is that in both games exists a different enemy called Dullahan, which is a palette swap version of the first one. Here we have Daedalus in both games, and their Dullahan version. The Pharaohs of Ridorana Tower will be host of 4 different bosses before reaching the top. The first one being the Black Tortoise with no head apparently, but it's not the appearance what matters, but rather the name. Actually, the appearance is very important and it has a great meaning, but that's for later. The name of such boss is Pandemonium, and that's a callback to Final Fantasy II very final dungeon, located in the depth of hell itself, as the word Pandemonium is related to that. And also, if I have an opportunity to mention that place and its best theme ever, then you know I would do it. That's like my top priority. Moving past the main story bosses and going to the hunting missions that Final Fantasy XII provides, first we have one very known enemy, our favorite 6-armed half-serpent female sword user Marilith. Although not exactly looking like that, still is in its serpent form and with a scholar scheme that matches her very first appearance in the original Final Fantasy as one of the 4 Fiend of Chaos, also later in Final Fantasy IX, and even more exciting in the upcoming Stranger of Paradise, where you can already see her looking very sick in the pictures released, and I am very excited for that. This one is a little weird. Atomos is the name of, originally, a boss in Final Fantasy V, but then became a known summon in the series. Not the prettiest, but it has very defined characteristics, like a big old mouth to absorb everything. And in Final Fantasy XII, the classic Final Fantasy summons appear but in the form of airship names. Things like the Ifrit, Leviathan, and the last big bad boy Bahamut. Atomos is included in one of these ships too, so it's weird and fun to mention in my opinion that one of the hunts is a monster with the same name, but it feels like there's not relation between them. The best boss name makes a return in Final Fantasy XII. In my previous video about Final Fantasy IX, Death Guys made already its appearance, so it's the second time the special optional boss of Final Fantasy VI is referenced. Again, the references in 12 have to be more about names and less about the looks of the creatures. But something they share with the original depiction is that you can find this hunt mark when visiting the deck at any airship you fly with, which is the same way you fight this flying monster in Final Fantasy VI, by encountering it in the air during the World of Ruin, so that's a neat detail. Through all the games of Final Fantasy, you'll find iconic summons that repeat over and over, and some new additions that may appear only once, or that they shine in that game and not much in the others. Such is the case of the Guardian Force in Final Fantasy VIII Diabolos, which started as an optional boss fight. By the name alone you can imagine how dark and metal this entity is. That's why the Final Fantasy XII version has this demonic imp design, with a lot of fire, although still looking pretty different to the original design that will stand out and make its appearance in spin-off games, or remastered versions of older games even. This combination of a floating demon mage and squid, I guess, with a face similar to the Thulu, is the Pisco demon, the Black Sorcerer. Its name may be a combination of the Latin word piscis and a demon, so those fish properties may be there. This hand, in name and also looks, is a reference to an enemy boss in the very first Final Fantasy, whose Thulu-like features were recognizable. Now, even if this particular enemy name is only in the first game, there's another type of enemy called the Mind Flyer, whose design is the same but in a different color, and it's present in multiple games, so maybe you are more familiar with this design. When you accept the hunt mission to defeat an enemy called Orthros, and you see that it's a big flan with a specific color palette, you may think it's just a random color to make it feel unique when it's not. But the name won't ring a bell until you realize that it's the same Japanese name as Final Fantasy VI's famous recurring enemy Ultros. Not only that, but when you pay attention at its purple color and its description mentioning the advice, "Don't tease the flan," both are made to reference this purple octopus, who not only is famous in its original appearance, but made it in future games as optional bosses like remasters and Final Fantasy XIII too, so it has its story in the franchise already. I know this is the second headless turtle from this list, and I guess that's weird, but I guess this same type of enemy in different colors is one of the underwhelming things of the game. This turtle enemy is called the Gill Snapper in Final Fantasy XII, and is known by its Japanese name as Girugame. You know, the combination of gill and the Japanese word for turtle. That's why you can say it's the same enemy as Final Fantasy V, the Gill Turtle. This enemy can be found in the Gill Cave. I wonder why it's called like that. Another familiar face around here. The Antlion makes its way to this game too. After being referenced in Final Fantasy IX, there's also a hunting mark in this game, with the original being in Final Fantasy IV. In this case, you can see that it belongs to the Mantis type of enemy, and you'll find it as a swarm of monsters deep in the loose mines. In every game prior, the Antlions are related to an insectoid type of monster, who lives in desert areas or caves near it. I can't leave this good boy behind. Even if it's not the first time after Final Fantasy V that Gilgamesh appears, opposite to Final Fantasy IX, this elite hunt mark is meant to be the same one as its original depiction, and his obsession with getting the legendary swords only grew stronger during its travels. As during the first fight, you can see him bringing up famous weapons like the Buster Sword, Zidane's Orichalcum, and later the Brotherhood from Tidus. And more importantly, he brought his amazing battle theme with him, so all is well. Oh, I like this one. So far, and including my previous video of the references in Final Fantasy IX, it has been callbacks of the Final Fantasy games from 1 to 7 mostly, for logical reasons. So it's nice to see a Final Fantasy X specific summon in this case, being represented in this game. And that's with the elite Mark Hunt XIII. In both games, an electric horse or unicorn-like monster. We mentioned before how summons in the franchise can be game specific, and this is the case with XIII only being in the Final Fantasy X universe at that point. Earlier we talked about how Pandemonium was a reference, because of its name, but not its looks. Well, there's a reason it looks like that, a black tortoise, and that's because when you reach the hunt mark number 44, you'll fight the Shadow Seer, a ghost-like figure that more importantly summons 4 different creatures to fight. For what this video tries to focus on, I should talk about how other two of these beasts are the Fenrir, a white tiger-like creature that was also a Final Fantasy IX specific summon from Eiko, and the Phoenix, which is a more common summon in the franchise. But the true inspiration for these four beasts is a different one, and honestly too good not to mention and talk about it. Basically, the four creatures are a representation of the Xixiang, or the four Chinese mythical beasts. These ones being the mentioned Pandemonium, representing Genbu, the black tortoise of the north, Slit, representing Seiryu, the azure dragon of the east, Fenrir, representing Byakko, the white tiger of the west, and Phoenix, representing Suzaku, the vermilion bird of the south. I just love things like that, so I think it's worth mentioning, especially because you may be able to distinguish these beasts in other type of media, as obscure as they may be, like watching Beat X or playing Digimon War 3. Like me. The super boss of Final Fantasy XII that would probably take 18 hours to beat has also two meanings that are very cute for different reasons, similar to those four beasts. The cutest of them all lies in its name. This one may be an allusion to the game's director Matsuno Yasumi, which you can create Yasmat with the first syllable of the name. But not only that, as he had to leave Square before the game was finished, the name of the hunting mission is called Farewell to a Legend. The other allusion, more related to the topic of the video, is that it's surprisingly close to the most famous Final Fantasy super boss, Shinryu, and of course that doesn't show in its looks, neither for the Final Fantasy V original version or the changed Final Fantasy IX one, but rather it seems to act as the substitute of such enemy, as it's not only similar in description as a holy deity among dragons, but also its hunt mission triggered the possibility to fight the other super boss Omega Mark XII, which is the same war machine-like enemy that acts as Shinryu counterpart in Final Fantasy V first and acts as such in future games including this one. So you can have an idea that Yasmat represents Shinryu for that reason. Moving on to the Espers of Final Fantasy XII, which in a way acts like the summons of this game, but they are not the traditional ones you may know, as those have a spot for the airship names as mentioned before. These ones all have very specific and interesting names and designs, and half of them are inspired by the same game, and such is Final Fantasy Tactics. The relationship between these two games are very special. As mentioned before, not only it was directed by the same team, but also they share the same in-game world of Ivalice, where all the regions and cities and empires are from. So part of the lore of Tactics will make its place to 12, in the form of Espers, or by its name in Tactics, the Lucavi, some group of demons whose mission is to bring back their leader Ultima, the High Seraph. You see that name in a bit, but all the Lucavi that appears as Espers are Belias de Gigas. The first Esper you encounter also matches with the first zodiac sign that they represent, Aries. That's why you see it as a giant with ram-like horns in this case, while Gigas is a common term for a giant enemy. Its element is fire. Adramelech the Wrath, also known as the Wrathful Spirit Emperor. It has a bird or a dragon-like form and its element is lightning. Its head, though, is a goat, and that is because it represents the zodiac sign of Capricorn. Hashmal, the Ruler. Also known as Bringer of Order, Hashmal is associated with the earth element, and with the zodiac sign of Leo, or Lion, that inspires its features in its humanoid design. Cuchulainn, the Impure, or maybe Master of Impurity. This one doesn't please me to talk about as a Scorpio myself. I'd rather have a scorpion-looking creature, but I guess the aim was to focus on its poisonous look and abilities. I guess it's charming in its own way? Maybe? Salera, the Death Seraph. Or to make it different from Ultima, who is the High Seraph, just the Angel of Death is fine, as it's known in Final Fantasy Tactics. It still sounds edgy, and that's always a good thing. His element is the Death type, as it should be, and the zodiac sign is Gemini, for reasons. One interesting thing about the bio of this Esper is that it mentioned an angel of truth called Emet-Zolch, which is the name of a major character in Final Fantasy XIV. Ultima, the High Seraph. As just mentioned, Ultima is the leader of the Lucavi in Tactics, and maybe also final boss, who's given the title Angel of Blood. And it's also an Esper in Final Fantasy XII, the holy Esper in terms of elements, and to mirror its important role, acts as the mastermind of the plot of the Espers to rise against the gods who created them being the Okuria. And the zodiac sign is Virgo, which fits nicely. Zodiac, Keeper of Precepts. And lastly, the strongest Esper in Final Fantasy XII, and it's special from the rest because it's that unique 13th creature that represents Ophiuchus, the serpent holder in the Zodiac, who tends to be very special when it's represented in any media. Its uniqueness is also in Tactics, as is instead of being part of the Lucavi, acting as a powerful common summon you can use in battles. Moving on from all the Final Fantasy Tactics exclusive and direct monsters, we move on to the rest of them, and the topic, as you may get from this one, is previous Final Fantasy final bosses, specifically from 1 to 5. First of all, we have our friend Chaos, King of Reincarnation. Beside its name, there are some concepts about them that link it together to the original bad boy, like its bio alluding to the cycle of life and time loops, calling it a walker of life's wheel, or its 4 swords surrounding it can be the famous 4 Fiend of Chaos. Mateus the Corrupt, specifically the Corrupt Emperor Mateus, and that's an important detail, as an allusion to Final Fantasy II final boss, whose name is original just Emperor, while the name Mateus was given to him later. Not only that, but the bio mentions how it got corrupted and fell screaming into the depths of hell, there to be imprisoned for eternity, similar to the original Emperor. My favorite Final Fantasy main antagonist, by the way. It is associated with the element of ice, and the zodiac sign is Pisces, which helps her with the design, and in the best Saint Seiya fashion, it's very pretty looking. Famfrit the Darkening Cloud. This Esper is fought alongside Dr. Sid during the main story. May not ring a bell at first glance, but if you take in consideration that it's also known as the Cloud of Darkness, you can immediately relate it to Final Fantasy III final boss with the same name, so that's more straightforward, even if its design has some similarities with XIII actually. It controls the element of water and represents the zodiac sign of Aquarius, the water carrier, as he carries a large jug on his shoulder. Seromus the Condemner. Back to the more direct names, Seromus, the Condemning Tyrant, is a reference to Final Fantasy IV final boss. They also share their signature attack called Big Bang, and are described as being tainted by hate. It's considered the Esper of the gravity element, represent the zodiac sign of Cancer, the crab, which is why it has a giant claw and look pretty intimidating. Exodus, the Judge Zal, also known as XIII, the Three-Spirit Judge. The Judge part is mainly because it represents the zodiac sign of Libra, so the design with the scales shows that, but besides that, both given names are an allusion to Final Fantasy V main antagonist and final boss, which can be known both as XIII or Exodus in the first translations of the game, so that's a cute allusion. The Esper also desires to bring the world into nothingness, or the famous void. And the other thing is that the entity known as XIII in the Final Fantasy V lore mentions him as part or born from a tree of the Great Forest of Moor, similar to how here is referred to as a tree. Now here's the fun thing. So far we mentioned 12 Espers, for 12 zodiac signs, right? Well, one of those was Ophiuchus, so there's one more to cover, and that's the sign of Sagittarius, which is why it's depicted as half horse, half woman. This is covered by the Esper Shemhasai, the Whisperer or Betrayer, but who is she alluding to? If we follow the logic so far, from the Final Fantasy tactics that share the same universe, there's no appearance of such being, so it must be a mainline final boss. In her bio, it mentions how she betrayed the gods to serve Ultima in the rebellion, teaching men about destruction and evil. The truth is that there is no concrete answer, so there's only a space to speculate who may allude to. Of course, the most possible answer is to no one, but that's no fun. We have to think about our options. Is it Kefka from Final Fantasy VI, as it's the next game in line? Maybe with the concept of rebelling against his master and using the gods of the Warring Triad? Or is it Ultimecia from Final Fantasy VIII, for the mere fact that it's the closest in appearance, being a female entity sharing some designs like those weird side horns on their heads, and the color palette, maybe? Any answer may go, as it's only a headcanon and no confirmation, but still fun to think about it personally, and worth to mention.
The first reference or small inspiration you'll see may be one that most players catch on, even without realizing, and that is that the very first fight when you get to control a character for the first time that serves as the tutorial battle is a big throwback to the introduction of Final Fantasy VII for a couple of reasons. First, you have the enemy itself that Lightning and her gunner teammate Sash have to defeat, the Manasfin Warmech, which at first glance you already can see the similarity with the Guard Scorpion, the iconic first boss of Final Fantasy VII that Cloud and his gunner teammate Barret have to defeat. But also you can take both whole sections as similar, because you arrive to the destination out of a train, and more importantly, and what most people notice, when Sash mentions Lightning that she is a soldier at Guardian Corps, she is quick to clarify,
そこんとこを聞かせて。
iconic line that you can hear in Cloud's Strife when clarifying the same thing to Barret in both the original and 7 remake. Now, I think it's very worth to clarify, to think that Cloud and Lightning are the same type of character is just being wrong, and probably judged by their introduction lines and moments like this only, while ignoring their individual arcs that reveal and mark them as very different people personality-wise through their long games. Now, to follow some sort of order here, the next category I'll cover without jumping ahead in the story too much will be about the name of some cities that you go through the game. The first one is Hobb's hometown, the port city of Parum Porum. This name is a combination of the names of the twin mages from Mysidia in Final Fantasy IV. The boy Palom is the black mage, and the girl Porum is the white mage, that join you or Cecil to help him find his path to redemption to become a paladin. Weirdly enough, this is not the first time that their names are used as Easter eggs in other Final Fantasy games. I guess they have a nice ring to it. The other city is the colorful, happy, and the place where nothing can possibly go wrong, Nautilus City of Dreams. This one is called the capital of entertainment and the perfect place to hang out with chocobos and enjoy the holographic shows in which many eidolons appear. This name is the same as one of the airships in Final Fantasy III, that replaces the first one called the Enterprise. But to be fair, while the airship is probably inspired by Jules Verne's novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, this city has a better inspiration. It just looks like a Nautilus shell. Speaking of airships and locations, during some segments in the game, you get to be in an airship owned by the cavalry under the command of Sea Drains, which you get to see for the first time when they rescue Snow from the Brescia Lake and is brought here. This one is called Lindblom Airship. Lindblom, of course, being the name of one of the coolest cities in Final Fantasy IX, hometown of the theater trope Tantalus, which the protagonist of the game Zidane is part of at the start. You could say that it's his hometown, in a way. And funny enough, also under the command of a guy called Sid. The second airship you get to visit in the game is not from the cavalry but from Psychon, and under the command of the antagonist Jill Navad and Galenth Dicely.
Contrary to the previous airship, this one you get to raid to save Sash and Vanille, who are being captive here. Its name is a reference to a location in Final Fantasy II, or the faction of Palamecia, the main antagonist empire of the game, which led by Emperor Mateus conquered many cities at the start of the game. One could notice that both places are home of the main antagonist at some point, while the Lindblom in both times is on the side of the protagonists. We move on to some fights and big bosses that their name resembles a reference to a previous game. In Final Fantasy XIII, you have the summons called Eidolons in this case, and there's two of them that are introduced for the first time. The first one being Sash's Brachendolr, and the second one is Vanille's Hekatonkeir. Their name can be associated with Norse and Greek mythology, but this last one, aside from looking creepy with that many arms moving, has a name that is also from a boss in Final Fantasy III, that shares the elemental attribution of earth magic. So in a similar fashion to what happened to the summon Atomos, that was a big boss in Final Fantasy V and turned into an Eidolon in Final Fantasy IX, Hekatonkeir got the same treatment. An Eidolon or summon that did not appear as a fight or a playable, but does have its own appearance, is Final Fantasy X main Aeon Valefor, often associated with Yuna herself. This one appears at Nautilus Pompa Sancta Parade, same place you get to see Ifrit in the game. In the play, the Cocoon Lucy transforms into Valefor to face Ragnarok. Even the text on the cloth around its body reads White Valefor in the Cocoon script. One of the main antagonists and leader of the Psychom elite group, Yak Roche, acts as a boss fight when going back to Cocoon, and such won't be against him alone, but the Psychom machine he pilots called the Proud Cloud. The name, besides the details and translations, is a clear reference to the original Proud Cloud of Final Fantasy VII. Not only that, but they are both big machine bosses piloted by the directors of the antagonist group of each game when returning to the main fair city in the late game. Roche in 13 and Scarlet and Heidegger in 7. One classic monster for a big boss in the entire franchise is the Tiamat, originally a 6-headed dragon in Final Fantasy I, but also appearing in 9, 12, the MMOs, etc. This game, in its own way, also has an easter egg about this iconic dragon, in the form of the final boss of the final dungeon of the game called the Tiamat Eliminator. A big dragon or wyvern-like figure that when I personally saw it, in my most proud moment playing this game, I thought it could be a Tiamat-related boss when it first appeared. Bahamut, Behemoth, Tiamat. Oh, Tiamat! Or it could also mean that I'm a little bit obsessed trying to catch these references. The next category that I'd like to cover in this first game is the one that covers the different weapons you can get and use for your party members, and highlight the ones that are unique to previous installments. Probably the most recognizable is Fang's ultimate weapon, which comes in two parts, and, as the Lancer or Dragoon that she is, their names are based on iconic characters. Her weapon called the Venus Gospel can be upgraded into the ultimate Cain's Lance. I say that because Cain Highwind from Final Fantasy IV, although not the first, is the most iconic Dragoon in the series, and his armor or weapons would be the first inspirations for the Dragoon class in general. And the Venus Gospel is the ultimate weapon of the most unconventional Dragoon ever, and the reason I love him, Cid Highwind from Final Fantasy VII. Seeing them next to each other cracks me up every time. One can argue that the most iconic weapon reference is actually this one instead, and could be right. Lightning's choice of weapon is the Gunblade, which actually uses as a gun too. And what more iconic user of that than Squall Lionheart himself? That's why one of Lightning's weapon is a Squall ultimate in Final Fantasy VIII called, you guessed it, the Lionheart. And the third weapon,
As Vanille uses a rod similar to a fishing pole to hunt air monsters on the Grand Poles, is not the most common of weapons in Final Fantasy, but the name of her ultimate weapon Nirvana matches Yuna's celestial weapon from Final Fantasy X, which is also a rod or a staff, even if she doesn't use it for catching air fishes or anything. So taking in consideration that, the name, and that they are ultimates can be a direct reference. Another way of having very sneaky Easter eggs in the game is to make use of the Fal'Cie. These are the supernatural beings to the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythos that are partially responsible of the creation of the land and turn people into Lucy, so they exist already as a foundation of what Final Fantasy XIII is built upon. That's why you'll see a lot of these creatures more in the data log and lore bits than in the main story maybe, and a lot of them have some very unique names. For example, the aquatic Fal'Cie Bismarck, which dwells within the watery refuge of Grand Pulse's Zulia Springs and reshapes the land through water erosion. This matches not only in name but aesthetically with the original Final Fantasy VI Bismarck, an aquatic esper that looks like a whale and has a water elemental magic attack. The Fal'Cie Kujata, which takes a more significant role in the story, as this is the one that resides at Eurit Gorg, providing the power to Cocoon and more importantly gives Dutch, Sash son, the Lucy brand that will matter through the story. But still, its name is the same as the summon that appeared in Final Fantasy VII, Kujata, which is closer to the original inspiration of a ball with many elemental magic attacks. The Fal'Cie Eden, responsible for the administration and security of Cocoon and keeping it afloat. Your objective in the game is to reach Sash so you can confront Orphan. So you get to see Eden's servant in the final dungeon, which if you ask me, one of them look very similar to Mateus in Final Fantasy XII. But the name, besides having its religious connotations, also is taken from the unique GF or Guardian Force in Final Fantasy VIII Eden, the ultimate girlfriend of the game, which its designs combine some heavenly and sci-fi attributes too. The Fal'Cie Tahaka, one of those you get to fight in the game, specifically at the top of Tal Jin's tower, shares the same name, at least in Japanese, to a boss fight in Final Fantasy IX, the enemy you deal with at the Ibsen castle, Taharka. And lastly, the Pulse Fal'Cie Anima, known as the Pulse Vestige, and which will be the one turning our party members into Lucy and giving them the focus. It is based on the Final Fantasy X Aeon Anima, often related with Seymour, although you can still get it yourself eventually. And lastly, one of my main inspirations of making this video is how I started getting achievements while doing the side quest of the game that are the XIII missions. When you enter the most open part of the game at the Grand Poles, many XIII statues will ask you to slay a monster that they couldn't in their life before turning into what they are now, living in regret. Thing is, when you fulfill such missions, you receive 4 achievements on Steam at least, for low, mid, high level and all missions respectively. Their names are all referring to the Warriors of Dawn, the 4 heroes of Final Fantasy V that seals X's death prior to the adventure of Parts and the crew. Kelger's Cup is named after the leader of the werewolf tribe, Kelger Blundet. Cesat's Chalice is named after the king of Surgate, Cesat Matthias Surgate. Dorgan's Trophy is named after Bart's father, Dorgan Closer. Finally, Galuf's Grail is named after Galuf Han Baldesion, king of Bal, and your own party member during the first half of the game. Moving on to the first sequel, named just Final Fantasy XIII-2, where we have our 2 protagonists, Sarah Farron, Lightning Sister, and Noel Kreis, a hunter from an apocalyptic future. The first thing you can notice about this game and the difference between the previous one is the many routes you can take in your adventure through the timelines. And in terms of reference, this will matter mainly in 3 worlds you visit: Serendipity, the casino-like place room for minigames; the Colosseum, your place to fight very specific unknown creatures with DLC features; and the big city of Academia will present a lot of quizzes through the streets, and this will have a lot of callbacks, so let's see some of those first. Some terminal around Academia will present you a quiz called Brain Blast to obtain fragments and experience as rewards. And in a similar manner, the NPC Captain Cryptic's confounding quiz
which is a duplicate of Lightning's superior, will test you with some questions that include: what is the famous line spoken by the famous actor who made it big on the show Wild Rose? The answer will be, "You are from the Rebel Army." This is an allusion to how in Final Fantasy II the people of Fynn formed the Wild Rose Rebellion after being invaded by the Emperor. One answer also includes Ekmet Tolos, which was a password in the castle. What was the name of the device used by Sanctum's elite soldiers that allowed one to control gravity? One of the wrong answers here is Noah's Lute, an allusion to Final Fantasy III, as it's a key item found in the Temple of Time, which is required to awaken Unei. For that same question, another answer was Galuf's Bangle, an allusion to Final Fantasy V party member previously mentioned. What legendary creature was found in a block of ice on Grand Pools? And its answer, Baligarmanda, is a direct allusion to Final Fantasy VI Esper of that name, the one you encounter at the start of the game, trapped in ice too. What was the most memorable role played by Jeff Roney, an actor rumored to be carrying on a steamy love affair with actress Terra Branford? It's a pretty direct one, with Final Fantasy VI protagonist Terra named, but in Japanese, Jeff Roney is instead Edgar's fake name Gerard, also from Final Fantasy VI, of course. The question, of all the Chocobo Race urban legends, which one is said to possibly be true? And the answer, a prisoner won the race and he and his group were pardoned, is a direct reference to the event in Final Fantasy VII, where you have to win a Chocobo race for you and your party to leave Corel Prison. There will be optional wrong answers in a couple of questions that will be Project Genesis or Loveless, which are all related to Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, especially its main antagonist Genesis. Which celebrated movie introduced the Gunblade, a now popular toy among kids? And the answer, The Sorcerer's Knight, is a reference to Final Fantasy VIII and the movie Laguna starred in, which also inspired Cypher when he was a kid. What mythology-based movie won the Tantalus Award for Best Film in 328 AF, and many others similar, is an allusion to Final Fantasy IX, because Tantalus is the name of the theater trope from Lindblom. One answer for a Moogle-related question is Stiltskin Bakery, him being the traveling merchant Moogle in Final Fantasy IX, who you can see through the story. And lastly, what is the name of the exciting underwater sport that requires a ball? Is a question that alludes to Final Fantasy X. So with that in mind, I hope that you all got this answer right, which is of course Blitzball, the main sport and minigame in that installment. The visit at the casino-like place Serendipity will have some other cute details around. Besides having an intentional resemblance to the gold saucer from Final Fantasy VII, the first one I personally think about is how one of the items you can get through your coins is Setzer's dice. Setzer Gaviani is a gambler in Final Fantasy VI and the first gambler to appear in the series, and one of the weapons he could use were the dices, dealing damage according to the numbers you get. And lastly, the biggest or at least more obvious Easter eggs in this game have to do with the big DLC battles you can have at the Colosseum. Some of these feel more like a staple of the series than just a unique callback. That is because two of the most iconic enemies in Final Fantasy, Gilgamesh and Omega, are available to fight in this game. And while these exist since Final Fantasy V, their appearance as super bosses have been present in multiple games at this point, even in remastered versions of older games. So these two cases are more expected but nonetheless amazing choices to see in this technology. One more unique fight is the DLC monsters Ultros and Typhoon, which are specifically based on the Final Fantasy VI appearances. Ultros is this unique purple octopus-like creature that you see in many stages of the game and have banter with, while Typhoon is a two-headed, very disgusting monster that attack your ship and are linked together eventually. During their fight, Ultros flirts with Sera, states his hatred for muscleheads, like with Sabine in 6, and introduces Typhoon in the same fashion and similar choice of words as in his final fight with you in Final Fantasy VI. And the DLC challenge Take Me to Your Leader will make you engage with these tiny blue extraterrestrial beings that are based on the creature Poo-Poo from Final Fantasy VIII. One that for years I was so confused about how true that was because it looked so out of place, but it was perfect for an era where there were more mysteries than common knowledge about the game, so it worked perfectly. The third and final part of the trilogy is called Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, also known as the game that I hold very dear and close to my heart. In here you control only Lightning and change outfits with different commands and attributes as if you spin around jobs mid-fight. And if you're going to have dozens of outfits, then isn't that the perfect place to show references to previous games? I think so. And this can be. Going in game order, we have first the Splendid Admiral. This gorgeous pirate look is the same look as Faris Sherwitz from Final Fantasy V, but specifically from Yoshitaka Amano artwork, not the game sprite. You can see Faris using this in games like Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. The Heartstealer Garb, which may be my favorite in the game, is also a direct outfit from one of Amano's artwork, and in this case is from Locke Cole from Final Fantasy VI, which is personally the best looking guy and outfit in the entire series, so you can see my bias here. Also, as a side note, it has been told that some of the more masculine garbs Lightning use are based on the model of Setzer, previously mentioned character from this game. The garb Soldier First Class, I wonder who that belongs to. But as a DLC, it not only comes with the outfit alone, the weapon Buster Sword and the armlet from the uniform are also included for Lightning to use. But, along with her unique victory animation and victory fanfare, are all to allude Final Fantasy VII and its protagonist Cloud Strife. There's another outfit available in some versions of the game, that is Midgard's Flower Girl, which is Aerith Gainsborough's outfit from the original game. Along that, you can smack enemies with the stick and use the ability Great Gospel, which is one limit break Aerith had in the original FF7. You'll also get the victory fanfare and a similar victory pose. Speaking of magical ladies, the garb Spyra's Summoner is an exact outfit from Yuna of Final Fantasy X. This one also comes with some weapons like her staff, a shield with the ability Hymn of the Faith, and victory poses to copy her. The coolest thing though is that it's not only her summoner outfit, but also her gunner dress sphere from Final Fantasy X-2, her most known look from that game, where you can also change outfits. In this case you don't get a couple of guns, as that doesn't seem to be the case for Lightning, but the sword, the one she uses in the warrior dress sphere, or probably better known for being Tidus' weapon, the Brotherhood. Besides garbs and weapons, you can equip yourself accessories, and one of these are the Soul of Minu accessory, which refers to the white mage Minu from Final Fantasy II. The Falcon charm is named after the airship Falcon from Final Fantasy IV. These are attributed to the accessories that grant you fast ATB recovery. Tycoon's Comb refers to the Kingdom of Tycoon from Final Fantasy V, and the pendant Lena and Faris wear. The High Wind charm is also named after an airship, this case the one from Final Fantasy VII, led by Sid Highwind, and also helps you recover ATV. Not an accessory but an item dropped by a big enemy at the desert is the Desert Rose, probably a callback to how Ruby Weapon at the Coral Desert drops that item as a reward after beating it. And the Stroll charm, as any other charm, is an airship reference, in this case the one in Final Fantasy XII. You will be able to notice some cute stuff around with quest givers and shops, just like how there's a shop called Jack's Goods with the Sanarkand Aves logo, or a quest giver called Lamont, which is the fake name that Larsa from Final Fantasy XII uses. But the most important thing, and the second reason I want to make this video, is one of the gems of Lightning Returns, the street musicians, which for our video it means musical references. Every single one of these hit me right in the heart and I was so happy. So, in order. I don't know about you, but when I get to hear the main theme of Final Fantasy, also known as the prologue from the original, in any fashion, like opening sequences like in 4 or 12, or the ending credits like in 6, 7 and many more, I start tearing up no matter the context. So you know that even that the street performers at the entrance of Yuznan play this exact song in a marching band way, I will still get emotional and jam along with them for a bit before moving on. In the Tavern of Ruffian, there's a bard giving us a show, and this one is also pretty emotional, as it's Final Fantasy III main song from its overworld, Eternal Wind, with lyrics, and not only that, but you have both the English version and the Japanese one accordingly.
Lost within the darkness, I am blinded by light, a radiance that brings endless night.
Back in Yuznan, the city that doesn't sleep of course, there's another tour guide that will appear at the end of the town, and after a couple of talks, he will start doing his flawless show, with another of the most iconic songs in Final Fantasy history, and one that exists in more than 10 official versions probably, Gilgamesh's battle theme, The Battle on the Big Bridge.
What song are you playing?
Oh my god, this game is so great!
and after some high-level missions by two eccentric dudes, they will reveal to you that their names are Biggs and Wedge. Those names will be familiar for many reasons, but the specific reference is to their main appearance in Final Fantasy VI as Terra's soldier companions. And we know that because after changing their profession and start dedicating to being street musicians, they will be playing a rendition of Terra's theme. Not just FF6 main protagonist music, but also the one that plays along the opening, where you can see the Magitech armor walking through the snowfields, being Biggs and Wedge two of those. Starting with Final Fantasy I feels right, because this is the loading screen of 15 when you start the game. In a time unknown, only a prophecy keeps hope alive in people's hearts. When darkness veils the world, the King of Light shall come. This opening line is an allusion to one of the most iconic elements in the original Final Fantasy, the intro cutscene that reads, "The people believe in a prophecy, patiently waiting for its fulfillment. When darkness veils the world, 4 warriors of light shall come." Not to mention, the 4 brave warriors that are the main party in 15 also fits with the original Warriors of Light myths, as they were also 4. Right from the get-go, hitting you with the very first thing you see in the franchise technically. Speaking of opening cutscenes, the first moment you are thrown into when you start the game is an encounter against Ifrit himself. If we pay attention to the throne he's sitting in a cool way, it is a very creepy one with skeletons and such, one that you'd find more in an undead themed dungeon. This specific throne might be because of one of the concept art for the man and the legend Chaos himself, from Yoshitaka Amano, shown here. As it shows, they certainly share the creepy aesthetic, especially that head at the front. Now, the other one from the original Final Fantasy I'd like to mention is one that may or may not be intentional, but I want to keep it because if I think about that game, I think about the Warriors of Light, of course, the crystals, maybe Chaos, and the prologue, which is not only an iconic scenario replicated in other games like Stranger of Paradise or Theater Rhythm, but also it's when my anthem, the main theme of Final Fantasy, plays for the first time. This idea of the 4 Warriors of Light looking over Cornelia, as they depart on their journey across the bridge, might be the inspiration for Noctis and his friends to look at Insomnia in the distance after the invasion, and across the bridge that leads to it. And in a way, it also signifies the start of their own journey. Moving to Final Fantasy II, this one for sure is not my own impression and kind of a guess, but it's actually confirmed and told by the director himself. The introduction scene mentioned with Ifrit, as you fight him for a brief moment as the characters are introduced, is an homage to the very start of FF2, where the game starts with a type of boss fight, and on it, you get basically decimated. While FF15 is not an actual boss fight that defeats you, you get thrown into it immediately and things get quite chaotic before you go to the more normal start of the game. We jump ahead to Final Fantasy IV and mention one very special enemy that appears in the dungeon Stayleaf Grove. It's the Demon Wall, which is somehow iconic to the point that appeared in many other Final Fantasy games, making it more of a staple enemy rather than a specific callback, but I think it's worth to mention, because finding it and having that first reaction to its appearance at the dungeon was very cute. It was that feeling of satisfaction and excitement to meet something out of the blue instead of just normal enemies and loot, and I have always a soft spot for those things.
Also, a little shout out to Cecil and Rosa for being the Final Fantasy couple with the wedding at the end of the game. I'd like to live a lie and pretend that Noctis and Lunafreya wedding at the end of this game is as wholesome and not bittersweet at all. From Final Fantasy V, for me the most representative one is the super boss of the game added in the Royal version, the ancient war machine Omega. This war mech is kinda common in the series for a super boss, appearing in 12 and 13 too, but I think this is especially about 5, the game where it first appeared also as a super boss, because it shares a couple of specific qualities. They both are labeled as level 119, and a more clear sign is that the music that plays during the 15th fight is an arrangement of the original battle music and main theme of FF5, so there's no doubts about which callback are making here. One could say that Gilgamesh appearing at the Gladio DLC and having a remix of its track Battle at the Big Bridge also counts for Final Fantasy V, as similarly to Omega, it appeared there first. But I think he has transcended a simple callback to a borderline mascot of the series. And this particular reincarnation of him might be one of the most different ones to his original self presented in 5, so I leave it as a special mention. The other reference to Final Fantasy V I do want to mention is a simple one, as it's more about a normal enemy that shares the same name. It's the Garulas, a cute mammoth-like type of beast that are found and fought in the plains of Duscae as regular enemies. The reason I mention them is because I do have a strong memory of the Garula in 5, as they are nice animals around, but one of them took part in the actual main story, when it went berserk and proceeded to attack the water crystal that eventually shattered, and acted as the boss of that dungeon, giving a stronger impression on me than a normal random encounter would do. Final Fantasy VI is quite inspirational for many reasons. I think one of its biggest influences is that it sets the trend for any antagonistic Empire forces, and that's the case for FF15, where the Empire of Niflheim employs the use of magic technology, more commonly through the deploys of Magitech soldier troopers, but also their use of Magitech armor, cyber suits that in this game are bipedal robots and part of the forces you have to fight. This is of course based on the Magitech from the Gestalian Empire of Final Fantasy VI, man-made magic technology harvested from the captive Espers, and more iconic is the presentation of the Magitech armor, from Terra's main artwork to the opening sequence and the many fights with or against them, which was also included in Final Fantasy XIV Empire in a more faithful way, and it looks quite pretty. In Final Fantasy XV, Magitech is an ancient civilization technology that the Empire tries to replicate, and during those times, the war that ended such civilization, known as the War of the Astrals, shares the same Japanese name as the War of the Magi in Final Fantasy VI. A war that also happened a millennium ago that ended up with the exile of the Espers and the lack of magic in the world. Both games reach a certain point in the story where a big event causes the world to be enveloped in a catastrophic state, enough to be considered in some way the end of the world, which also causes a time skip to happen. In Final Fantasy VI, Kefka causes the cataclysm by destroying the balance that the world had from the gods of magic, the Warring Triad. This would cause the world's main continent to shatter into different islands, and the release of many ancient monsters which would wreak havoc. This new present will be known as the World of Ruin. In Final Fantasy XV, especially after the death of the Oracle, daylight starts to gradually disappear from the world, allowing more demons to show up during the longer nights. And after the protagonist Noctis is sealed inside the crystal for 10 years, sunlight will permanently disappear from the world, leading to the eventual extinction of all life on the planet, as only demons can exist in such world. And this eternal state of darkness will be known as the Long Night. While different from each other, as the concept of the end of the world mid-game is more common than not, funny enough, when Noctis wake up, the first main quest of this chapter will be called World of Ruin, and that's where the specific FF6 reference comes from. On that note, you could also say that both Ardyn and Kefka fill similar roles in their games. They are not the main emperors, but rather they are the great instigators that facilitate the Magitech weapons and demons to them, and also will be the ones to dispose of their emperors themselves to proceed with their plans and cause their respective end of the world.
Not to mention, Noctis called Ardyn a jester, so that's kinda cute. Also a little side note, Biggs and Wedge makes an appearance here, as Aranea Highwind's subordinates. I know these names started as Star Wars Easter eggs and appeared in many games, but as they debuted in Final Fantasy VI, might as well give them a shoutout. The first thing to address when it's about Final Fantasy VII and the references from that game is to mention the name of the empire Niflheim, as one of the most important towns in FF7 is Nibelheim, but of course that's also because they are both based on the same word from Norse mythology, so I would consider more of that than an Easter egg. Instead, for me the big reference from 7 is once the Empire invades the city of Insomnia. Part of their weaponry includes the iconic Diamond Weapon, a colossal Magitech monster based on the boss of the same name and sharing the same kaiju feeling of towering over the rest, but ironically with origins completely opposite. In the world of FF7, the weapons are the planet's defense mechanism, deployed to destroy those who would harm its ecosystem. In 15, it was a man-made creation, with the power of Magitech and demons. This iconic weapon never looked better before, and is probably a taste of what's to come. Through the game there also will be a ton of names that originate from 7, mostly when it's about weapons. Gladio's great swords will be named after many of Cloud's weapons, like the Hard Edge or Force Stealer, but also Prompto's guns will have some names from Vincent, like Death Penalty or even Cerberus. Or even a quest called Interrupted by Fireworks, same name of one of the songs in the game. But if I have to mention one more sequence that remind me of FF7 specifically, it has to be during the ending, where the 13 Lucian kings appeared in the final encounter to both join Noctis in his sacrifice and finish off Ardyn. These are the spirits of the former kings of Lucis that reside within the Ring of the Luci, passing their power and knowledge to the new king that inherits such. And to me, the design of the kings at that moment made me feel it was based on the Knights of the Round, an iconic summon that appeared only in that game of the series, and consists also of 13 medieval knights that take turns to attack the enemies. Or maybe more specifically 12 knights, and the final one is King Arthur, as they are based on that Arthurian legend of Britain. So both in designs, concept and quantity, this might have been a specific reference to either the summon or the actual legend. On the topic of scenes that give me FF7 vibes, I'm sure one could say that Luna Freya's death shares similarities with Aerith's. And while I understand that connection, I think it's because there was more of an idea to replicate those types of feelings in the player than an actual reference itself, but might as well mention it. Final Fantasy VIII introduced the Guardian Forces as their summons, and one of the first ones to be introduced is also an original one exclusive to that game, the summon that represented the element of lightning replacing Ramuh, Quetzalcoatl, a green bird-like being with the ability to cast a thunderstorm. This has been its only instance as a summon, as usually Ramuh takes that role, with some exceptions like XIII in Final Fantasy X. In Final Fantasy XV, at the end of the dungeon Stayleaf Grove, we'll meet with Quetzalcoatl once again, but this time as the boss of this place and main quest Party of 3. And we'll share some of the main characteristics that make it have some resemblance with the Guardian Force. First of all, this is a flying monster that resembles a bird too, although with more draconic details and designs, as it feels more of a divine beast. And the other main trait of it is that makes use of lightning elemental attacks, capable of inflicting shock status. A variant of this boss, that can be fought as a side quest later in the game, called Mictlantecihuatl, has a closer color palette to the original GF, having more green tones than the blue ones from the Quetzalcoatl. It's important to know that Quetzalcoatl is based on the Mesoamerican mythology, where it's depicted as a feathered serpent, but the lightning aspects given to it I think it's exclusive from these games. Which, by the way, one of the small snippets of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth shows a hunt mission where we fight a Quetzalcoatl, so we are going to see it again in a similar fashion, so that's cool to check out. Must pay attention to its elemental affinity. And with this boss, other couple of more normal enemies made their comeback in 15 that debuted in 8, such as the Mesmenir or the Anacondar, and of course many other names like the Lionheart gun for Prompto, being very linked to Squall's gunblade, etc. One of the random side quests you can get in Final Fantasy XV on one of the early areas of the game, the region of Duske, that is silly enough for it to be included in the first demo available involves the objective of catching some frogs in the wild, in those swampy areas. This side mission is based on the minigame from Final Fantasy IX that involves the character Kina. Once you are able to visit the Ku Marsh, and after meeting this character, every time you reach a specific screen filled with frogs, you have the possibility to control Kina, catch many frogs, and get rewarded with more items as you accumulatively collect them, as apparently it's their favorite type of meal, although that's hard to say considering that they like to eat mostly everything that moves. The reason we know these two minigames are linked is that the description of the mission in the demo says, "Frog from fond childhood memories, never caught more than 9", which can be both a way to say that the childhood memories are those time playing the older game, and that the number 9 was carefully selected to make the connection bigger. Other references to Final Fantasy IX that we can find include some name references, like one quest being called A Place to Call Home, which is a huge theme in that game, or how the name for achieving Hunter rank 10 is Alleyway Jack. That is not only the name that Gilgamesh from 9 calls himself, but also his very link to the Hunt rank of that game. We talked before about how the lightning elemental summon is usually Ramuh, with the exception of Quetzalcoatl, but also from XIII in Final Fantasy X, which resembles a unicorn with a long fancy golden horn. Well, funny enough, in 15, while Ramuh is present in the game indeed, his staff will pay an homage to XIII, as its design represents that head and horn from the Aeon. Those small details that makes me happy. But more importantly, I need your help to make sure I'm not losing my mind. But when I first played Final Fantasy XV and I woke up at the World of Ruin, you meet on the road with our now grown-up friend Talcott and take us to Hammerhead, where everyone will be waiting for us. During the trip, you are able to watch the cute interior of the truck, but also how the roads, surrounded by darkness, are also surrounded by many types of demons, showing how dangerous the world has turned into. But before reaching that fortress, I noticed something that caught my attention and got me distracted, as no one seemed to acknowledge what I watched. As we take a turn on the road, I see this silhouette. And in my opinion, or at least my first impression that I refuse to change, is that it was the image of Aaron himself, walking around in the middle of the demons as if he was part of them. Aaron, of course, one of the main characters of FF10, who wears a traditional red haori, closed with a strap and 2 brown belts wrapped around it, similar to the samurai or bushidos you may encounter generally. I didn't have a way to confirm this, as you can't stop the ride or explore the dark roads later in the game, so I will stay with the doubt if that was indeed Aaron, but I'd like to pretend I'm right because that'd be cool. Final Fantasy XII has a small but cute reference included in 15. You may know that in the world of Ivalice, the Mughals look slightly different to what maybe we are used to, and there are 6 in particular that are relevant and appear in different games from the sub-series, but 12 is the one to feature them all. The most known one is Mont Blanc, leader of the clan, that will give you access to many hunts in the game. There's also Sorbet, Horn, and Hardy, working at the Muglin station in Rabanastre. Nono, who's usually related to airships, and you can see him even working for Balthier's airship, the Stroll, and Gerdy, who is in charge of the Chocobos ranches in the city. The reason to mention them is because of a quest at the Mughal Chocobo Carnival of FF15, a special event that was limited time in Alticia. There, you have the mission to locate 6 Mughal dolls and take photos of them. Can you guess the name of all of them? They are indeed Mont Blanc, Sorbet, Horny, Nono, Hardy, and Gerdy. The world of Final Fantasy XIII and XV are weirdly connected, because it's not in-game, but mostly in the real world, with the whole thing with Versus 13, and that eventually changed and turned into 15, etc. So maybe in the production, some of the assets used can be the same because of that, instead of being explicitly made to be an Easter egg. For example, how the cards used by the bros when playing around in the havens or the hotel rooms are the same ones from the 13-2 casino-like place Serendipity. They are modified poker cards with different designs to include the lore of Fabula Nova Crystallis instead, like the goddess Etro or the Lucy Brands, for example. But one moment that for sure gave me a lot of flashbacks to Final Fantasy XIII is the boss fight against Rabus Nox Floret and his fate in general, where as he attempts to resist and confront the Emperor, he is manipulated and killed by Ardyn, who slices his arm off and left his body along the letters he wrote. After finding his body and proceeding to make it to the end of the dungeon, we meet Ravus' body as he was revived as a demon to battle Noctis and his allies. With what little remains of his humanity, Ravus begs for Noctis to kill him. This way of having his body ravaged and being turned partially into a mindless monster is very similar to Snow in Lightning Returns First, and for me even closer to Sid Reigns in 13, although in a more voluntary way, as he attempts to resist and defy the fate given to him by the Fal'Cie, and turn his body partially into the monster's Seath, having a boss fight against him. After the fight, he turns into a crystal as he finishes his focus by defying the fate given to him. But, similarly to Ravus, he will become a puppet by the antagonist of the game later on, so both characters can't catch a break in their respective games. Also voiced by the same actor in Japanese, the GOAT Yuichi Nakamura, who also voices Dion in FF9-16, so you could guess how good his fate was in that game also. This also may have to do with the idea of 15 being created after Versus 13, so the concept of demons taking control of your body or turn into one might be similar to the one of Lucy turning into a Seath eventually. The Japanese term for both games is Jigai after all. Besides that, there's also some more specific but smaller references, like Lightning's weapon, the Blaze Fire Saber, being available for Noctis, or small lines like Blinded by Light and Dust to Dust being quest names. When it's about Final Fantasy XIV in Final Fantasy XV, I think the obvious thought goes to the collaboration in 15 that involves a fight against the boss fight Garuda, who can become the only extra astral to summon in the game as reward, which I think is pretty neat and wouldn't mind to see intra-collaborations like this again, either in 16 or Rebirth, but I guess that's less of an easter egg and more of a special event. What I think it's cool to show instead is the way Noctis defeats Ardyn at the very end of the game in this celestial or crystal plane of existence, where the spirits of all the previous kings support him and are sent flying towards Ardyn to finally and fully defeat him. While I don't think it's an easter egg, it certainly is very reminiscent of the way you defeat La Habrea at the end of the Eren Reborn expansion, as in that case you are also sent into this realm where the crystal resides, and the spirit of your comrades through the journey support you and everyone throw their entire body in beam form to finally defeat him too, which I gotta say is a very specific way to do so. That's why I mentioned them. And with that, let me talk about one last topic in the easter egg and references department, and it's the Insomnia business signs around. When you get to visit the crown city of Insomnia, you'll find tons of business and any type of signs in general on the streets, and I gotta say, not only there are quite a handful of them, but also so many of them are little references, as there's almost a callback to every game ever, and I think they deserve their own spot apart. Some examples here. Spira, or the Spira Bank, the word from Final Fantasy X, Bevel signs, the big city in Final Fantasy X, Windhill vending machines, the town in Final Fantasy VIII, Lindsay signs, the god in the Fabula Nova Crystallis myth, so mostly Final Fantasy XIII, Nanaki signs, the real name of Red 13 in Final Fantasy VII, Moritz Cafe sign, the character from Final Fantasy IX, Medicine Kadowaki, from the Final Fantasy VIII character Dr. Kadowaki, Karaoke Little Aiko, a party member from Final Fantasy IX, the 777 XIII, to reference Final Fantasy VIII boss XIII 092, and the YRP sign, to reference Yuripa, the trio from Final Fantasy X-2, with their respective colors. The first mission that our protagonist Clive has, while he is still a young soldier in training, is a small expedition to clear the land from the goblins and orcs that have been spotted around our hometown. Goblins being the de facto basic enemy in this game since its very first one. They are like the Goombas of the series. After joining forces with our two friends, Not Biggs and Not Wedge, the boss of this introductory mission is to defeat a Malboro, another well-known classic FF enemy, although not usually related with first missions, and written as Morbol, more similar to the traditional translations of the older games. But these are all very generic stuff. The big first easter egg is when things get more chaotic in the town, and we have to clean up the mess from the invasion of the Empire, meeting our new boss. The Knight of the Blinding Dawn is a traditional dragoon of the series, one of the most iconic jobs, but not only that, This fabulous introduction to him posing like that is an homage to the logo of Final Fantasy IV, who had Cain Highwind, the dragoon of that game, posing like that. Since his introduction, while not the first one, he has been the poster dragoon for the last 30 years. Along this, there's a small callback to Final Fantasy XIV too. And it's that in both English and Japanese versions at least, the voice of this character is shared with the character Estinien, who, as you may predict, is also one of the main dragoons in that game.
May I have this dance? I lost my family to Nidhogg's flames, and 'twas with fury in my heart that I took up the lance.
And we know that the main dev team is the one in charge or linked to 14, so it makes sense and it's cute. After the first flashback chapter, we come back to present time, where we are part of the group called the Bastards, with the objective of defeating the dominant of Ice, Shiva. Each of us have a code name based on a dragon-like figure, and after discovering that the dominant is our childhood friend Jill, we rebel against our small team and fight the leader, whose name is Tiamat. In the original Final Fantasy, Tiamat is a 6-headed dragon and one of the 4 Fiend of Chaos that represents the element of wind. At this point, I feel like every other compilation I did of references include Tiamat in some way or another, because while it's already a go-to dragon name, there are cases like FF9, which is a love letter to the franchise, and have those 4 Fiend coming back, so it's present there too. After being rescued by good old Sid, and going to his hideout that will serve us as our base for a long part of the game, we are able to find some peculiar characters, in particular this Bard, which is common in the series, but his name is Spoony Bard, and this, along with his looks, is a reference to Final Fantasy IV, as the first part of the series, Edward Chris von Mois, is called like that in a not friendly manner by Tella, after learning that his daughter Anna escaped with him and was murdered during the invasion of Baron against Damsien. Clearly not the happiest of moments in that game, considering that the song playing is called Sorrow and Loss, but everyone remembers that line with fun memories instead. In our first mission along Sid, we go through some forest and encounter our boss fight of the area. This time a lizard-like spiky beast with the name of Fafnir. Fafnir is a dinosaur-like monster enemy that was introduced in Final Fantasy VI, also known as the enemy that I like to bully a lot when I have to record my character using their Esper attacks and animations. While it also got some callbacks from random enemies in later games, usually with dinosaur or lizard-like features. The next hour of the game follows the conflict that both Clive and Sid have against the dominant of Wind, Benedicta Harman, and her icon Garuda. Garuda is a peculiar case because while it's one of the main 8 icons or summons in this game, it's also not that common through the series history, at least not in this particular design. While still an amazing choice for the wind element, one choice I think should stay. So I think it's at the very least worth to mention that her and her Harpy's friends, the Chirada and Suparna, are enemies that originated from Final Fantasy XI and XIV mainly, even having their appearance in Final Fantasy XV, but only during a dungeon that works as a collaboration with XIV. But once that conflict is over, we get to see the mysterious hooded man around, and revealing his identity, that is suspiciously close looking to Joshua, Clive's brother, who is referred to by his companion as Margrace. This is the last name of a character in Final Fantasy XII, Alcide Margrace. This character is a member of the family Margrace of Rosaria, one of the biggest empires in Ivalice. If that name sounds familiar, it's because this is one of the many similar names that Final Fantasy XVI has in relation with the Ivalice games, so that's a very cute connection. The next section of the game has Clive teaming up with Jill on the journey, as they have to come to terms with their own past. In the middle of it, there are going to be your expected monsters roaming around in between your destinations, and a group of those are the Crayclaws. While they certainly act as your average normal animal monsters to use as a punching bag, this was also a very specific enemy and boss in Final Fantasy V. You could say that I mention it because 5 is my favorite 2D game, but still, games like Strangers of Paradise use this enemy as their boss fight in the dungeon that represents Final Fantasy V, so it's relevant to me. And hey, in both instances, the fight happened on our way to a location that aesthetically matches the concept of ancient technology going on, both in the Ronka ruins of 5 and here in these mysterious ruins of 16. The conclusion in 16 is different though, because at the end of this mini dungeon, Clive will have his starting point to redemption and acknowledging his past actions, and this will manifest in a boss fight against himself, or his shadow self. While I don't consider this a reference by itself, I do see the potential vibes that this could give of Final Fantasy IV, where the main character Cecil, who's all about redemption, fights in a more unconventional way against himself, so he can become a paladin, instead of the Dark Knight he always was, and start properly his redeeming journey. During this section there's also another big Easter egg happening around, and it's a classic one. Through the fields you can explore, and the small farms that exist, you'll notice a couple of scarecrows, but more importantly, the way they are dressed. This strip is of course the traditional Final Fantasy Black Mage outfit, that started in FF1, but appears every time it can, acting almost like one of the many mascots of the series. After this personal arc, we jump to the next big important story-related segment. Led by Cid, we aim to destroy the first crystal of this world, and establish that these will be our objectives from now on, while the main theme of Final Fantasy plays for some reason. Once we reach the crystal room, where in a more fitting way the prelude plays, we meet a very strange and intimidating entity trying to stop us. Once we are transported to this place where this Neon Genesis Evangelion thing is staying, the boss fight starts and its name is Typhon. Typhon is a known enemy that originated in Final Fantasy VI, although it had special appearances such as a summon in Final Fantasy VII or a Colosseum boss fight along Ultros in 13.2, as that's how his first presentation was. As you can see, it doesn't exactly look the same, although I guess they share the fact that none of them have a traditional lower body. During this fight, one of the attacks that we'll use is called Demon Wall, which yes, are literally walls that are coming at you and have to avoid, which is also a reference to a boss fight that originated in Final Fantasy IV, which yes, it was literally a wall coming at you. Although, back then it was more of a time trial to destroy it before that. This enemy replicated once more in FF7 and 12, with their respective unique changes of course. This is a very important part of the game, as it is the last big event before the second time skip in the story. And while some key events happen, we have the first introduction to what's going to be the main antagonist in the game, and Final Fantasy Tactics fans will be delighted to learn that it's called Ultima. That is why, in the word of Ivalice, Ultima the High Seraph, or Angel of Blood, is the game's final boss, and leader of the Lucavi demons. While at first appearance it's more of an angelic look, and this guy over here doesn't look very angelic, we can come back to this when it's our turn to fight him eventually and see if we can find some design similarities. One that includes less arms and more wings at least. Anyway, 5 years went by. Time flies when you have fun. Of course, the context of the world has changed a little bit, and without too many details, we have a new fancy hideout. This is the point in the game where the notorious Mark hunts are available, and there's one of the first ones that is interesting to us, while we can check the more advanced ones later. The one I'm talking right now is the Dosmer. This is a griffon-looking enemy monster here. And while this archetype of enemies have appeared in many occasions, a creature with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, the interesting part here is the name itself, as it's the name used in Final Fantasy III for one of the rare encounters of the enemies in the Sunken Cave, and it's an alternative version of, you guessed it, the Griffon. On a story-related focus, we start our journey to destroy the crystals once again, and we start by the Iron Kingdom, the one who imprisoned Jill all those past years, so she can have her closure with it at the same time. On it, Jill confronts the lunatics and their leader the High Priest Imrean, when a mysterious hooded man signals the moment, and around the volcano, this enemy called Liquid Flame emerges to fight her and eventually Clive, while Jill in her Shiva icon form protects us from the lava itself. Liquid Flame is a boss fight in Final Fantasy V, during our objective to, funny enough, save the Crystal of Fire there. The Queen will be possessed, and we have to fight this entity, which in both games has the gimmick that while being a completely fire being, it's constantly shape-shifting around. Of course, during the FF5 days, these were more limited forms, while in 16 you have them being really entertaining, especially if you're watching a video and not stressing about the fight itself. The next conflict involves the Dhalmekian army and the dominant of Earth, Titan's personal army clashing against us. In one of the most nerve-wracking moments, Jill is captured and intended to be executed until someone saves the day. It's not Clive, but our pet wolf Torgal. I'm sure all of you are familiar with him, but here's his moment to shine, and surprise everyone with his power and flashy looks. After a little bit more of story, it is later explained how Torgal is related to the historical entity from the north, Fenrir. While a wolf named Fenrir is not a surprise in any works that include Norse myth, it has been used in the series before, and while there's a couple of examples, the one I relate to this one is Final Fantasy IX, the Eidolon that you get as soon as Aiko joins the party, whose aesthetics match closer with this bluish aura around, instead of a more generic wolf like FF6. The other reason I included him is because my personal theory before the start of the game was that he was going to have some relation with Fenrir, with so much focus on him and summons in general, so I need to flex the victory for a second, don't mind me. Once things calm down a little bit and our objective shifts to Dalmekian territory, we have some small new things that are linked to previous games. The first one is that this is the introduction of Mid. I won't dwell too much on it, as she was already mentioned in my video about the roles of Sids in Final Fantasy, but we do get confirmation that she is his daughter, something we could predict or assume as every character named Mid in Final Fantasy games have a fraternal link to the character named Sid. Another thing that could catch your eye is how the item selected to be able to walk around the towns in this territory is fittingly the Desert Rose. This key item is one known for being the item dropped by the Ruby Weapon, one of FF7 superbosses, a kaiju-like enemy that is hidden at the Coral Desert and will jump scare you if you're not paying enough attention. In that game, giving the rose to an old man in Koln will grant you a free golden chocobo that allows you to go everywhere in the map. And of course, it matches the aesthetics as they are both found in the desert area or town. After working things out with Titan's Dominant, once back in the hideout to breathe a little bit, we see our favorite engineer Mid planning to finish building a brand new ship. That's probably expected for a Final Fantasy game, but the detail here is that its name is the Enterprise, relevant to us for being Final Fantasy IV main airship that we get access to thanks to its owner, good old Sid. I have to mention that Final Fantasy III also has an airship called like that, but if I have to pick one for each, I'd pick the Invincible for 3 and the Enterprise for 4, so it's the winner here. There's also the fact that Mid needs mithril material to finish it, and that's something we have to find in FF4 too. After being able to do some quests and scouting missions, meeting new places like the waterfall that gave me a lot of flashback to FF12 Ridorana Cataract, or crafting materials for new weapons like Excalibur or Lionhearts, which can be also very known terms in FF history, we infiltrate the Imperial capital, just in time to see some chaos and a Bahamut out of control. On our way to reach the palace, we have a boss fight against the enemy called Necrophobe. This name is the one used for an optional endgame boss fight in Final Fantasy V. More famously known for being the one that gives closure to the arc of the iconic Gilgamesh, as the conclusion of that fight has him surprising the enemy and instead of attacking us, attacking Necrophobe instead, and dealing a final blow that involves sacrificing himself, departing with some last words to us. But don't worry about him. We'll see him again in 70% of the games, like no other character. The fight against Bahamut has a very specific thing that I need to mention. When you think about this iconic dragon, you think also of Megaflare. If you see other iterations of Bahamut like Neo or Zero, you think of Giga or Teraflare. As far as I know, the biggest prefix to denote quantity is Exaflare, and it's quite a big attack as it destroys a celestial body on its way. But here, this is the first Bahamut that actually uses Zetaflare in Final Fantasy, but it's not the first iteration of this attack. If you want to see what's the other instance of it, it is... So now we can officially say that Bahamut has reached the same level of magical power as Dawn Attack. After a fight that involved traveling to space, which is not the first time that had happened in Final Fantasy, and some emotional reunion, the fight shifts towards the nation of the Dominant of Dark, Odin. During some previous scouting, we learned that the organization called the Undying has been helping Joshua and Rosaria from the shadows. While the name itself is something that could have no meaning, I should mention that Final Fantasy XII final boss has the same name. But the first big boss fight we have against the army of the King Barnabas is against the High Commander Sleipnir. I am aware that this is less of a reference to Final Fantasy and more to the fact that Sleipnir is Odin's six-legged horse in Norse mythology, but I should mention it, as the only time Sleipnir appeared as an individual entity and not just as Odin's steed
was in Final Fantasy III as an enemy, looking as you could expect. The other thing is that during the fight, it uses an attack, the Spear of Gungnir, which while still sounded very attached to the Odin inspiration, this spear attack have been used before in games like Final Fantasy VII or during a cinematic during Final Fantasy IX, for example. Barnabas proceeds to show us that we are not prepared to face him properly, and after both a cinematic and a boss fight getting Santetsuken, Clive and Jill end up overnight at the shore, spending some nice healing time. Now, this is not a reference, but they have a nickel for each time a Final Fantasy couple have an existential dialogue and end up naked in the wild, while a wolf-dog companion was at the very least close. I'd have 2 nickels. Which is not a lot, but it's weird that it happens twice, I believe. Healing time seems to be helpful, because at this time in the game we are allowed to chill a little bit and do more side stuff if needed, and approach the rest of the journey through the almost dead continent of Waloed, and clash with Odin himself. On our way to do that, we proceed to yet again enter another of these ancient technology ruins or dungeons, and one of the bosses to fight here is called the Control Node. This is purely my own thought, but when I saw this, I thought about the boss fight of Final Fantasy IV, the CPU of the Giant of Babel, who is not only a big technologic sphere, but also has a couple of nodes, called the Attack and Defense node. After fighting some Iron Giant, which is a classic big boy fight in the series, we finally get our chance to take Barnabas down, and through the course of the fight, there's one small moment I'd like to mention. Once the Icon Odin is prepared to do a final blow, Clive, in his Icon Ifrit form, will overpower Sage and destroy the sword. And he proceeds to use the traditional Santetsuken instead, which to me reminds me of the way Seifer in Final Fantasy VIII is the only character or enemy that instead of getting insta-death from this attack, surprises Odin and kills him instead, which eventually leads to Gilgamesh taking his place. See, he was fine since the last fight. Speaking of Gilgamesh and Final Fantasy V, did I say that the devs really like this game? Because not only they are right to do so, but I feel like I've been mentioning a lot so far. And here's another one. The whole party is united and reach to the last crystal to destroy, while meeting Ultima himself, who's going to take both Clive and Joshua to another dimension. This one is called the Interdimensional Rift, the very same name as Final Fantasy V Final Dungeon, a place representing the space between dimensions and where the void is sealed, which is very cool because it has the very different landscapes of the game in the same dungeons and you have to go through. The way this rift is open is similar to the way Ultima transports us to this place in 16 too. Before heading to the final dungeon of the game, as Ultima summoned a floating continent and shaped it in the form of a crystal, we are allowed to do the last bits of quests and hunts available, and we can check some of these last ones to see which names are references. The first one I want to start with is the hunt Gisamaluk. While in this game the enemy Mark is a banshee looking enemy, Gisamaluk is an enemy in Final Fantasy IX. In a location near Burmesia called Gisamaluk's Grotto, we can find this waterfish-like creature apparently mind-controlled, so it turns into a boss fight. So we are able to reach Burmesia from the Black Mage invasion of Kuja and the Queen of Alexandria. The second hunt I want to highlight is the ferocious dragon Sparrog. While of course there is a real-life inspiration in these names, there's already an existing wyvern-like enemy with this same name in the game Final Fantasy XIII and XIII-2, who you can find on the Grand Pools or Brescia ruins, and it also shares the red color aesthetics. The third marking hunt is the one called Pandemonium. This one is a classic. Many games have used this term before for different reasons. The origin of Pandemonium in the series was the final dungeon of Final Fantasy II, the Castle Pandemonium, and while other games like FF9 also made it a castle, there's also games like FF12 that made them a weird enemy. In this case, this hunt looked like a big fancy orcish creature, which mostly matched the aesthetics of the place he's found in, as he belongs to the continent of Waloed, Odin's territory, so there's a lot of that going on. And the last mark I want to mention is a very cute one. It's called Dread Comet. I don't know why. I can think why it would. Oh, that looks dangerous. Well, this very cute red chocobo is infamous for Final Fantasy XIV players, and in both games they do enjoy the raw destructions of summoning meteors, which is pretty cool they do that, as I'm not the one suffering for them. I can only say that my first introduction to red chocobos was a gift about having only one fear.
After that, there's only left to go to the Final Dungeon Origin and fight Ultima and its many final boss versions, as you can imagine. Which is where his creepy standard look changes, and it starts getting more of a normal but angelical look to it, which is what I mentioned about the design of Final Fantasy Tactics Ultima being closer to these versions instead. And honestly, ones I'm more satisfied with. I am a big fan of Final Fantasy final bosses designs, so I need my many limbs and bodies to be fancy and artistic, and less eye bags.
明日はクライブも行くのね。
ジョシュアのナイトだ。あいつを守ってやらなきゃ。あんな体で無理して俺は変わってやることもできない。
クライブ、
父上とジョシュアが危ない。急ぎましょう。馬を。
Yuna, it's time.
.やはりお前はアンブロシアなのか。アンブロシア、よく生きて。
Fight to protect something.
It's all right, little one. I'll help you. You're bleeding heavily. We have to stop it.
But you'll need to keep an eye on him for a while. I must say, he truly is a splendid specimen.
Your steed, your knight, your champion.
You. It was you all along. A hell of a disguise. You had me fooled. Odin, my faithful friend. It's good to see you again. Joshua-sama, こちらへ。
It is not a fairy tale. It is
まだ話していなかったことを思い出した。備忘録を見たいのだな。貴様が消えろ。
この手で世界を黒から救う。自分たちの意志で生きていくために。もうお前の好きにはさせない。ここで終わりだ。
罪深き人よ、廃棄。
全てを決めるのは我らのみ。